Can hear you. Can you hear me?
During the meeting, we will do as much as we can. Remote commissioners, please leave your camera on for the entire meeting. If you need to leave the meeting, please make an announcement. If you need any assistance during the meeting, please reach out to Tanya Black. You can reach her at tanya.black@caloes.ca.gov. And then just a reminder, we do use the owls in the center of the room to pick up sound and direct the cameras. So please speak slightly louder when addressing the commission.
I'm
And
sorry.
also-
This kid Mimoto said I cannot start my video because the host has stopped it, so I can start it.
I'm in the same book. Thank you for mentioning that.
Mhm.
Thank you. We'll work on that on the background while we get the meeting started.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I'm excited to be here and hope you all are as well. But welcome to the Seismic Safety Commission meeting of July 18, 2024. And welcome to our guests and all the commissioners for being here and those online as well. We will get a roll call from the board.
Chair Rabbit,
Here.
Vice Chair Garnes here. Commissioner Bumblebee,
Yep.
Commissioner Claire,
Here.
Commissioner De La Cruz,
Here,
Commissioner Ward, represented by Lori Nazara. Here. Commissioner Kim Lopez is absent, as well as Commissioner McGowan. Commissioner Miyamoto,
Yeah.
Commissioner Portantino, represented by Aztec Cocobon. And then Commissioner Rodriguez, represented by Allison Pistic.
Here.
Commissioner Silva.
Here.
Commissioner Wells.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great, thank you very much. On to chair remarks. I'd just like to say again, thank you everyone for being here. It's an honor to serve. Thank you to our past chair, Silva. Appreciate all your work and dedication, and just want to say thank you to all the staff for all the work that they do. The onboarding, I know that we have some announcements to be made through our executive director as we go forward. With that, I think we have a full agenda, but we'll have enough time to get through it and maybe a little early. Public comment? Is there anyone here who would like to speak on any of the items on the agenda? See no one rise, no one online. We'll move to the approval of our meeting minutes of April 11th. And I'll look to my colleagues for any questions, comments, or concerns. And if not, a motion to approve.
Move to approve the minutes of the April 11th, 2024 Seismic Safety Commission meeting.
We have a motion by Commissioner Silva and a second by.
Second by Representative Najera.
Great, thank you very much. And since we're split, we'll have to do a roll call.
Chair Rabbit,
Aye.
Vice Chair Barnes,
Aye.
Commissioner Bumblebee,
Abstain.
Commissioner Claire. Aye. Commissioner De La Cruz,
Aye.
Commissioner Ward, represented by Lori Missouri. Aye. Commissioner Miyamoto. Commissioner Portantino, represented by Aztec Cocobon. Commissioner Rodriguez, represented by Allison Pistic. Aye. Commissioner Silva.
Aye.
Commissioner Wells.
Aye. Great, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 5, which is an approval for a website update ad hoc committee. We had agreed and talked about updating the website, and putting together an ad hoc to do that. I'll turn to the executive director for this item.
Thank you. As you all are aware, we've begun updating our website. That updating has not yet occurred. The work that we've done so far is to go out for RFO to see if we can find someone to help us with website content and navigations and those types of things. You'll see on the screen in front of you what the website currently looks like. It has not been updated in a number of years. The only updates that were done once I came on board was this recent earthquake activity data call that you'll see goes across the top. It shows you the earthquakes that are happening immediately after they are reported, and that scrolls through it. It lists the 5 most recent, and it's continually updated. We also had updated broken links as well as added some resources. But now we are looking to update the content of the website to better reflect our updated mission and vision and strategic plan, as well as this 100 years of seismic safety in California graphic, which was done more than 20 years ago. It has a tremendous amount of great information, but it's basically unusable because I don't know about you, but I can't read most of what's up there, and nothing is linked. And so you can't get any more information. You have to go over to those very small footnotes over to the right, try to find how it corresponds to what you see in front of you on the graphic. So part of our website update will be looking to make this graphic much more interactive. And because it hasn't been updated in more than 20 years, we will be looking to add 20 years of information to this graphic as well. You would have received also from us a little survey to see who might be interested in being on the ad hoc committee for this update. Some people had responded that they were interested in doing that. And so we will be voting today on the ad hoc committee members for your reference and reminder is not a word. I'm gonna make it a word today. that the process for us is that we solicit commissioners that are interested to be on ad hoc committees, the executive, the chair and I discussed that, and then it is brought forward for the commission to vote on. So we had two commissioners who were interested in supporting us. Those were Commissioner Silver and Commissioner Garnes, or Vice Chair Garnes, in helping us with updating of the website. And with that, we need to take a vote.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you to the two commissioners for volunteering. And I should have said this earlier. Thank you to Vice Chair Garnes for bringing the coffee. That should have been right off the first thing said, so I apologize, but thank you for both participating. Any questions, comments, or concerns about the ad hoc? And if not, can I get a motion to approve the appointment of the two commissioners? We have a motion by Commissioner Wells and a second by Commissioner Claire. And with that, can we get a roll call?
Chair Rabbit.
Aye.
Vice Chair Garnes.
Aye.
Commissioner Vogel.
Aye.
Commissioner Claire.
Aye.
Commissioner De La Cruz.
Aye.
Commissioner Ward, represented by Lori Missouri. Aye. Commissioner Miyamoto.
Aye.
Commissioner Portantino, represented by Aston Tokabat. Commissioner Rodriguez, represented by Allison Christie.
Aye.
Commissioner Silva.
Aye.
Commissioner Wells.
Great. Thank you again. Thank you for that. Moving on to item number 6. There's a couple of items, a couple of opportunities for staff to participate on advisory panels and committees of ongoing or research projects. And we're required to approve those. There are 2 examples there. I'll turn this over to our executive director to explain.
Thank you. Since our last commission meeting, we had received 2 requests for support letters as well as participation on an advisory panel and an advisory commission. Next slide, please. The first one is a USGS grant on the influence of climate change on earthquake hazard and risk. And that is really looking at Diablo wind conditions after a magnitude 7 earthquake in the Hayward Fault. It's a 1-year research study, and they have asked us to participate also on their committee. The second one is a NASA research study or research grant called Inspires. This one is through Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Zhu has requested a letter of support, and they are doing research in collaboration with the University of Florida and USGS. That study will combine technologies such as proxy damage maps, social media, liquefaction, and transportation data to better assist emergency managers in determining resource needs and areas of concern. And they are also asking that we sit on their panel. So those are the 2 support letters and requests that we have received since the last commission.
Great, appreciate that. Looking to my colleagues, any questions, comments, concerns over participation in those advisory bodies and research?
For the,
Vice Chair Garnes.
for the personnel that are gonna be on.
It would be, it would be Jaw as our technical, oh, she's still outside. Jaw is our technical expert and myself.
Great. Any other questions? Not seeing any hands raised. I'll look to my colleagues for a motion to approve these 2 actions.
Second.
So we have a motion by Vice Chair Garnes and a second by Commissioner Silva, and roll call, please.
Chair Rabbit.
Aye.
Vice Chair Garnes.
Aye.
Commissioner Vogel.
Aye.
Commissioner Claire.
Aye.
Commissioner De La Cruz.
Aye.
Represented by Lori Missouri. Aye. Commissioner Miyamoto.
Aye.
Commissioner Fortentino, represented by Aztec Cocobot. Commissioner Rodriguez, represented by Allison Pistic.
Aye.
Commissioner Silva,
Aye.
Commissioner Wells.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on to item number 7, and we have our own Commissioner Miyamoto to give us a presentation on the earthquake reconstruction in Turkey and New Zealand and lessons for California. Okay.
He's on mute.
Okay, you're on mute.
All
There you
right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner. Good morning. So let me share the screen here. And here's how to do it. How's that? You can see well?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So next 30 minutes, so I want to talk about the maybe 20 minutes. I'll talk about the what I saw in the Turkey reconstruction and in New Zealand in the earthquake reconstruction Turkey and New Zealand, and what kind of lessons we can learn or apply in California. So Turkey earthquake happened last year in February. It's nothing small. You're talking magnitude 7.8, 7.5 back to back, and affecting almost 300 miles long and 100 miles wide area. It's a huge impact. And something magnitude 7.8 and 7.5 happen here, we're gonna have some serious consequences. Now, impact was affected almost 14 million people. It's such a wide area and a high density, and killed 51,000 people and injured 100,000 people immediately, and displaced almost 4 million people. And it's about 3 million people to this day, even after 1 year, and affected almost 10% of the gross domestic product. So it's a huge impact here. This is probably one of the worst earthquake I have seen for quite a while, maybe since the Sichuan earthquake. It's essentially magnitude matters, especially the 7.8 and 7.5 back to back, 2 hours apart, and early morning. That was a huge impact. So using NASA JPL data, we assessed about 1.7 million buildings. And most of buildings are apartment buildings, usually 3 to 6, 7, 8 story high concrete structures built in the it's built around maybe 20. It's a fairly modern area. Many constructions are happening maybe 30 years ago, but it's expanding a lot for the last several years too. But out of the 1.7 million buildings, about 2%, 35,000 buildings collapsed immediately. And 200,000 buildings, about 10% of them, it's a damage really bad, about collapsing. And almost 500,000 buildings, 28% of it, received light to moderate damages. So you're looking here is about 40% of building stocks that were not occupable. Why this happened? Because Turkey has been investing in disaster risk reduction, especially earthquake components for past 20 years now. So why this happened? Number one, that they do have a lot of older building stocks. The Turkish building code changed in 1998 to consider seismic consideration. So something happened, built or designed before that, there's no earthquake consideration. In the California case of 1973, so most of the case, back here in LA, if it's built prior to 1980, considered to be dangerous buildings, especially the concrete structures. That's number one. And two, no licensed system contractors, no inspection required by engineers. And that's a deadly thing. I mean, here in California, there is inspection in the license here. So that's a big difference. And I think that's something that we should be proud of. And this is actually rare in the world, by the way. So that system's there. But what we share with them with the same risk is older concrete structures, which killed most of the people. Something like this. So this is the engineers we call the plastic hinge formation. Believe it or not, this is a textbook. This is how should be worked like this. You know what I mean? We push the buildings, earthquake push the buildings to the, almost like a verge of collapse, but it's not quite collapsed yet. So that's it, how California building code is set up like that, and how the world is engineered. So this is one of the best case scenario here. It even looks bad as this, dangerous as it is. And this building was not repairable, obviously. But because there is no inspection system set up, there's a lot of irregular construction, such as the aggregate we put in concrete is smooth, or the smooth rebar, or doesn't have enough of a reinforcement. So earthquake engineering, the little tiny thing matters, you know. It's not like a missing columns of walls, anything like that. It's just that the little variation of things you do on the field makes a huge difference, life or death. This is what we call soft story, white soft story, which we see a lot in California too, right? Become look like this. That's how we lost many people in Northridge here in California. Soft story effect. Now, soft story ordinance kicked in many cities in California, and it's actually very successful. Tens of thousands of apartment buildings actually reinforced today, which is actually really good. But we do have a just ton of concrete structures, older ones, which has not been addressed at all. So Turkey obviously has a huge impact, you know, but at the same time, there's a success stories. For example, in Turkey, any hospitals, new construction, have over 100 beds, has to have a base isolation. What does that mean, base isolation? What it is, a building essentially sits on the ground, right? If the ground moves, buildings basically move with it. That's caused the damage. But base isolation is the provided gap by the we call rubber isolators, or could be air, but it's essentially roller. So if the ground moves, buildings stay in the same area. So here's the video of it. The brown piece, that's where the isolation is. So you can see that the top part of the hospital is moving back and forth. So there are over dozen hospitals like this in the epicenter area, base isolated. They not only do not receive any damage, but they're actually functional after this major earthquake. That is actually something we should keep in mind, that hospitals need to be functional. Police, fire station need to be functional. Without base isolation in this case, it's not possible, actually. Because a base isolation not only protect the building itself, but contents, you know, which is actually much more vulnerable, much more important for many cases. So having a base isolation like this is the way to go, and that's how it's proved here. And I mean, in this regard, Turkey is much more advanced than we are, because we don't make that kind of functionality requirements in part of a code. You know, we imply though, but we don't really enforce in a sense as what Turkish do. Assessment damage. OES and also our Seismic Safety Commission be working with the NASA JPL for quite a long time for this real-time damage assessment. Essentially, the satellite image show you the before, the after the picture. You know, you overlay the buildings, so you can see the difference in the movement, and you assign the damage to it. For example, this city called Hatay, that's a huge damage here, about 60% of damage. So you can see that the dots indicates where the major displacement of a building happened, as what damage is. And working with them for over the years, this map become very accurate, and it's a really useful tool. So once things happen like that, our team deploy into it, to the area, we can go to place where we know their damages are. And this is incredible roadmap, and something that we definitely need to use in California for the future earthquake, which is available. So this is how that picture look like that. But it doesn't mean that the old buildings are collapsed. This is a new construction done correctly. It's worked really fine in the town of Hatay. Now, one thing Turkish done right is response and recovery. Their reaction is super fast. I arrived there about 2 days after the earthquake, 48 hours. And every city, villages I went, the commercial contractor was activated, but it's a decree by president or ask from a president to basically get the contractor to participate on the urban search and rescue by removing debris and so on. So that's something you see like that everywhere. And every village I went, every city I went, there's the urban search and rescue team deployed there. Not only the local Turkish one, but international teams. There are over 100 teams deployed out there really fast. And I think this is the first case that actually urban search and rescue team were able to rescue hundreds of people. It's just scores of it. And it's just a lot to do with the fastness of a response. That's really matters. And also the quantity of it. There's 100 teams, from internationally show up and really quickly. That's really matters. This team from India, actually. And AFAD is equivalent to FEMA in Turkey. So this is actually a picture I took, again, I'm talking about 48 hours after here. Every city, every villages have this very organized, the tent cities essentially built. So people who actually lost homes, they can move to this family tent immediately, very organized. And there is something like 100,000 tents like this deployed really fast. That's pretty amazing, actually. And also the airport is a Hatay, which you saw a picture of it, 60% buildings damaged. This airport was damaged, but it's repaired, open after 4 days, And by the way, the every single viaduct, bridges, roads, everything, I was able to pretty much access everywhere and after 48 hours. And so one of the things is the public constructions, road and highway and bridges and schools and hospitals, they do have an inspection process that really helped a lot, obviously. So their performance is completely different from the residential buildings with a less inspection was enforced. So again, that this contractor just keep taking down. It's very important to activate the private sector, a commercial sector like this one. It's just that private sector has much more capacity than the public, obviously, especially heavy equipments and stuff. So the activation of the companies like that's very important. They actually volunteer their equipments and personnel and engineers on the field right after. Now, this is an assessment done by the AFAD, essentially that the house by house assessment, something will happen in California. The difference here is that they assessed something like 300,000 buildings in a first 1 month period. It's super fast. And they actually tagged each building with a QR code. So residents can download immediately to see what is the what happened their buildings or houses. But there are some certain gaps. Since the Turkish government is focused on the complex buildings, moderately damaged buildings and the lightly damaged one is kind of neglected. That's where that we get funded by USAID, the US government, to essentially to provide a communication communication campaign to the light and moderate damaged buildings. I think that's probably same thing is going to happen here in California too, because once the earthquake happens, there's a huge damaged area. That's where the concentration of support, come from government. But rest of it, lightly damaged and moderate, which still have a huge issues, they are neglected usually, and because there's not enough capacity there. So that's something we should really watch out for. That's because it's so important. This actually covers the much more larger population base. And the communication campaign, I think communications is really critical. Once the earthquake damage happens, what kind of action government's taking it day by day. I think that's a really critical piece of that. So we activated both international and national media to doing that. So next phase, we're actually looking into moderate buildings to repair. By the way, it's really important to repair, strengthening the damaged buildings. I know the tendency is that want to take down if there's some damage, The problem is once take the building down, it's really hard to reconstruct back. That's something we saw in New Zealand. I'm gonna show you right now. So this is the 2011 Christchurch earthquake. The Christchurch is a town of 400,000 people. This picture is taken right before that. It's a beautiful, beautiful town. And magnitude 6.3 happened and in the March. This after. Out of about 2,000 buildings in downtown Christchurch, they lost about 90% of it. What happened here? Because New Zealand building code is same as ours. Their education system, their license system, everything same as ours. There's no difference at all whatsoever. Maybe they're better actually a little bit. Here's what happened. Here's a picture. This is one of a high-rise building. It's a modern construction built in 1995. But you see a little kink on the left side. What happened is 3 columns just ruptured or failed at the 11th level. No one died. It's provided life safety performance, we call. Just like we do in California. Everyone was able to evacuate it. But once this happened, you cannot repair this kind of buildings. So it's total loss. This is exactly what we're gonna face in California. Just no doubt about it in my mind. This is the first time you see the modern construction, modern city, which is similar to California, went through that fairly moderate earthquake that results of it. So what does the resiliency means anyway? Let's take a look, because we're looking at resiliency, right? So time is horizontal axis and a social indicator such as, say, New Zealand case, the number of building types. Some earthquake happens, we lost 1,800 buildings, right? What we call direct loss. There's a downtime, which is the search and rescue or damage assessment. That's a downtime because there's no recovering effort happening. Then at the reconstruction side happens, recovery components. So if the bucket is smaller, then that resilience is higher. So how to do that? There's 2 ways to doing it. One is to reduce the direct loss, such as we talk about the using a base isolation system for the critical structures, or the building code to be not just only focus on the life safety, but more focus on the actual functionally part of it. I think that's very important. We're not at much cost doing that at all whatsoever, especially the new construction, But also one other way to do it, to reduce the downtime. That's what Turkish did. They reduce this really fast because they got you're talking about something like 50,000 the emergency response personnel on the ground. I'm talking about 24 hours time. It's unbelievable fast and massive scale. The reason they did that is they were preparing for the Istanbul earthquake, which is a town of 20 million people. That's why they have so much resources, set up to doing it. But so they reduced the downtime, then the reconstruction happened. Now, so you can address either direct loss by the building code changes and so on, or seismic strengthening of all the concrete structures, or reduce the downtime by the faster response or massive response. The reconstruction phase is a different agency, right, taken over by the county and the cities and the private sector. This piece is very, very critical, actually. Some cases it doesn't go so well. For example, New Zealand, Christchurch, what happened there? I was there about a month ago, back there again. Still about 30–40% of the cities, they're empty parking lots. The reason is that even they had a funding for almost $25 billion in a city of 400,000 people by insurance payout. But because of the government actually shut down the Christchurch for almost a year and a half for safety reasons. They shut down. So with the money coming through, private owners and business, they want to actually reconstruct their business, but they are prohibited doing that. So they left. They're gone to Auckland. They went to Shanghai. So they're just money fled, actually. So government need to be really open. Local cities need to be open up the private sector investment. I think that's a really, really, really important part of it. Feel like being a part of government, we can do everything, right? But we cannot. We don't have enough resources doing that. It's very important to activate the private investment. So that piece that I don't think the Christchurch done quite right on that. They done a lot of good things, of course, you know, but that piece is important. So I think California, we can address a lot on a direct loss piece by the more the functionality piece to addressing the building code today. And it's actually being a part of a code anyway, but we don't really explicitly say how to do it. I think downtime piece is, I think, pretty good. And OES and the FEMA, I think that they can do some great jobs there. But reconstruction piece, that's where the private sector have to get into it. You know, we are not prepared. That's one thing I know. So how can we do that? So let's take the example of LA, where I live, right? So kind of familiar about this area. There's estimated about 3 million buildings and 90% of residential buildings in LA. Looking through the old earthquakes happened in the past, let's say if the magnitude is 7.8, you know, 7.5 happened back and back, this kind of area, what's going to happen? You're going to see minimum 5% red tag, which means that the heavily damaged or collapsed kind of construction, maybe up to 10%. You're going to see somewhere between 10 to 20% yellow tag construction. So you're looking at somewhere between 15 to maybe up to even 20% of a building stocks are damaged. Yes, it's less than Turkey, but think about 15, 20% buildings out of about 3 million buildings. You're talking about 150,000 red tag construction and 300,000 yellow tag buildings after great LA earthquake happened. And I'm not even talking about the fire after the earthquake. That's fire happens after that, even worse, you know, which is the high probability of that. I know Charlie is going to talk about a little bit today. So we're talking about massive scale here. So what we can do, I think we can do a lot right now. We need to really facilitate a reconstruction effort by private owners. And we can do many things doing that. Like, for example, Kobe, Japan, right after the earthquake happened in 1994, the Kobe changed the zoning that able to have a investment happen in a certain area of a damaged area to be able to reconstruct by the high-rise, the condo buildings. So the existing owners got to pay out to purchase the land, and also they're able to get the housing inside of the new condo and be able to reconstruct really quickly because it's a facilitate that private sector investment. That's really critical. And then you got to avoid a large red zone area. That's very important. I think there's something that the Seismic Safety Commission can do is create best practices and really communicate that to cities and counties. I think it's a very important, you know. I know as a public officials we want to kind of red zone everything, you know, to say, hey, this is unsafe to go in there. But when you do that, we will kill the city. So we just need to balance between the safety and the reconstruction effort. Those knowledge has to go into the city and county levels. And there's need to be some sort of inner city agreement for mutual repair plan approval support. Remember, I'm talking about what I say, 150,000 permits, 300,000 permits want to coming through. How are we going to do that? I mean, even today, I tried to build a house here. It takes 1 year to get a permit in LA, right? Maybe more, whatever, you know, I don't know. So if you're talking about dealing with several 100,000 damaged assets need to be repaired really quickly. We need to do something about the approval process. How we can do that? I think the city of LA should have agreement with San Diego, Sacramento, San Francisco, so other cities can deputize to really assist their permit process. Well, that would be a really key piece there. And also the fast approval process. And some of the cities already adapted into. For example, Sacramento, you can do over-the-counter approval really fast if the licensed engineer architects bring in the plans and they explain what's going on for certain building types. I think that kind of system you need to pre-set up. So if you pre-set something like that, fast approval process or in a city agreement, and understanding of city officials to understand that avoid what works for the reconstruction or not, that makes a gigantic differences in a recovery effort there. So permit can be simplified. The timing is critical, and the response and recovery can wait for 1 year, right? I'm going to build a new house. 1 year is okay, but I got the damaged house. I want to live here. I want to go back. I want to be away from a tent provide the film. I want to get back my house. I need to repair it. I need to hire the engineer. I need to hire the contractor. There's a shortage of them, but I want to do something. But I just need to get a permit. It cannot be the bottleneck there. I think that's a very important part of it. But cities in California already have the over-the-counter permit process, fast one, just that the engineers do licensings coming through to get it, things like that. So those best practices, I think as California Seismic Safety Commission, I think we need to communicate. We need to provide lessons to the cities and counties. That's our job. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Always very much appreciate your presentations. Really do appreciate you bringing that to us today. And I'll look to my colleagues for questions for Commissioner Miyamoto. Commissioner Silva.
Hi, Kit. Thanks so much for all of your work around the world. You represent us well.
Thank you.
So you mentioned Christchurch is a model of what could happen in the United States because our building codes and practices are so similar. You used the phrase avoid red zone areas. Can you elaborate? Because the only way to avoid a red zone is to make sure that you have a diversity of building types, or if you're going to have homogeneous building types, that they're all newer and better construction. But I think you meant something different than how you build and roll out new construction. It's something in the practices of what you do post-earthquake.
Actually, so Crash's case was damage was not severe in my opinion. 2 buildings collapsed out of 2,000 and killed about 200 people, by the way. And red tag is similar to California ISO, maybe 5 to 10% range, that 15-20% yellow tag maybe. So it's a similar kind of a damage index I saw when I was there. But it's just that assumption by the engineers from the insurance, even insurance to city and central government, it was very conservative because New Zealand is like this country of safety is most important. The legal insurance protection, something they cherish. They have a great security there. So they tried to bring into that this earthquake reconstruction quite didn't work. So they just red zone. Essentially, no one can go into downtown Christchurch. I have a license going because we have a license in New Zealand. But even us, it took some certain effort to get the checkpoint. I'm a structural engineer in New Zealand. To go in there was not an easy task. And it was very cumbersome. So it was not welcome, to put it this way, to actually assist that private building and to do something about it. It's more like discouraged almost, So that will kill the economy, that kill the investment. So our clients, they go, you know what, kid, it's great. I want to go there, fix my building, start my business, but you cannot do this for 1 year. So they left. They left to different towns. It destroyed the communities. So that's what the red zone means like that. Now, California case is actually much more even unique. Today, many commissions maybe know that, or maybe don't know. If you engineer new high-rise construction, I'm talking new construction, chance of a probability collapse is really rare. But way it's designed is that you said a picture of this cracked concrete in Turkish. It's the same philosophy, able to essentially cause the structural damage, we call inelastic behavior, structural damage to absorb that seismic energy. So allowances, high-rise buildings, 50-story buildings, shake, doesn't collapse. But we are allowed to actually have a permanent offset from a center for almost like 1% permanent. I mean, think about it. The Millennium Tower in San Francisco, we're talking about a big deal, right? It's a 0.3% offset. You're talking about 3 times more. So what we're going to do, yeah, we probably do have to red tag the whole area. I can see that if that happens. I mean, first of all, we should not allow to do things like that. I think that's a flaw in the building code, by the way, or guidance. That's just, there's nowhere in the world allowed to do anything like that. So that's number one, right? But do not red tag the whole city because of it. Because out of 100 high-rise buildings, you're going to see that total inclination like that. Not all of them, probably like 5 to 10 of them. You're going to see something like that. And but the key is that that's always want to red tag everything, but just be careful about that. That's what I mean by that, to red zone the whole area.
So what you're saying is the cause in order to avoid over red tagging,
Yeah.
you truly have to overcome the inherent biases of the legal, financial,
Yeah.
engineering communities, which is just about everybody other than a dentist.
It's a difficult one. It's a difficult one because especially the engineers go through the damage assessment. Then, we tend to become conservative naturally. Makes sense, right? We just visually look in that red, yellow, green tag and stuff like that. So it's pretty conservative approach, and that's right things to do. But soon after do that, just have to detail assessment to understand that what is a really real risk is. And about more importantly, inform the people about it. Inform the realistic risk. I think that's a really important, real thing. Don't have to say something nice. I think the problem that every single earthquake I go, the government announces incredible plan of the reconstruction. Every government does that. And that doesn't help anything because that's never happens, by the way. Christchurch is the same thing, I guess the only place happened was COVID, but that's a different story maybe. But so we just be careful about that kind of communications too. You don't have to carry some in rosy picture, but having a realistic information, I think is very, very critical.
Thank you.
Representative Lucero.
Thank you, Kit. This is Lori from Cal OES.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get clarification. You had mentioned that, again, back to Christchurch, that their building standards are essentially the same as ours here in California. And we had a delegation from Christchurch that came to talk about seismic safety several years ago. And one of the things that I remember them talking about was that after that earthquake, they had significant changes in their building standards, including more emphasis on functional recovery, green building. They, they set aside portions of the city for like parks for retention basins and other hazard mitigation projects. So I guess my question for clarification is, was it at the time of the Christchurch earthquake that our building standards were the same, but today are they as much tighter than ours are here in California?
Most definitely. I think a lot to do with the public sentiment, I think that the policy and the building code and stuff like that follows what public demands most of the case. And obviously public is very sensitive about seismic risk. So like, for example, town of Wellington, no one's going to occupy, no major businesses or no government will occupy the building unless it meets at least 70% of a current building code, well, 100% most of the time, which means that the owners of the buildings, if they have a tenancy, they need to do seismic strengthening, so that's the something that drive by that more like a public demand. I think Japan's case is so successful out there for recovery effort and or safety effort or seismic isolation or so on. There's 10,000 isolations out there because public understand it, because they do have an earthquake, big one every 5 years. You know what I mean? Our case, fortunately, only happens once in 25 some years. The problem is that it's when it happens, we're completely unprepared, and that's what we are getting in one of those categories actually. But yeah, as a question, New Zealand, their building code is seismic hazard is completely different. Like Wellington, they just increase the seismicity by that 50% or something like that because of new discover the seismic information.
The emergency services world, we call that no good disaster, not wasting a good disaster. Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes that's what it takes. And here in California, not only do we have minimal, I guess is the best word, building standards, but we also have large variations from city to city and region to region that impact that.
I think the recent earthquake in California is affecting smaller communities. So I think the state and FEMA and everybody else can pitch in and it can manage it. But when we see this great Bay Area earthquake and LA earthquake in San Diego, those are bigger population centers. We're gonna have some serious issues, and because we're not aware of it. We think we're ready for it, but we're not at all whatsoever. And so I think what we can do as a state is really communicate that. I'm not talking about response that much at all. I'm talking about recovery components, reconstruction part of it. I think we should really communicate that to cities and counties in a more like a, that's what we can do as a state, right? That's our job, actually, provide this, expert ideas to them. So it's up to city counties to adapt that, type of things.
Any other questions for Kit? Kit, I just want to say thank you again. I want to ask you, I had heard early on and I know that you explained in New Zealand primarily, but did the insurance industry in New Zealand also play a role in the fact that it's closed down for 1.5 years? And
I guess I could say that they have abundance of insurance. I mean, they had, put it this way. I'm talking about that every single building had a full coverage there. That's why they had a $25 billion infusion, but city is what? 400,000 people. I mean, that's incredible, if you think about it. So they had it, but unfortunately, they don't have it anymore because the insurance obviously went up a lot. You know what I mean? And so therefore, they got the money, owners got the money, but government wasn't able to capitalize that to reconstruction of that city itself, unfortunately, because that way I told you. But now California is a completely opposite story. We have no insurance. It seems like we do, but we don't. Because of the earthquake insurance we have here is deductibles are very high, talking about what 15% or 10% or 20%, something like that, right? Those are a big number. And most of the houses we gonna have the damage is some of the ranges there, 10, 20% of a total replacement cost. So which means you have to pay yourself. That means we have no insurance. That's a fact. So we're pretty much bare as far as the insurance support is concerned, not like in New Zealand. And smaller community is not a problem. I think there's enough FEMA fundings and stuff like that. But once come to the large communities, I'm talking about LA, San Francisco, and San Diego, talking about several $100 billion damage.
I think
only one way would it be activate the private sector investment. That's where we have a robustness in California, So that's why the little policy changes makes a huge difference, like permit things I was talking about, or like a zoning and stuff like that. Doesn't cost anything. I think that's how government can facilitate the private sector investment there. That's how to reconstruct our LA and San Francisco. We can reconstruct those places stronger, better than ever before if we done right. Little things government can do to make it happen.
I was just going to add that I thought, people who lived in the areas affected by the wildfires thought they had fire insurance until the actual fire came in and they didn't. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you, Kit, is that there's multiple tracks that need to be tackled, including the building code, including also minimizing the downtime, which really means that preparation and pre-approved contracts and those kind of things that many jurisdictions do, but can probably increase going forward, and then speeding up the reconstruction process. But overlaid on top of that, of course, are these insurance woes, financing pieces, and at some point, the government or someone.
I think so too. Yeah, I agree. And insurance, I think there's some certain products now to cover the smaller insurance to cover that deductible piece. That's a good one, actually. So things like that, that's a very innovative products out there to really makes that insurance much more, make that part of a tool for that recovery, actually.
One last question, because I know we're going to talk about fire after earthquake, and I didn't see that as a big for both Christchurch and in Turkey. Could you talk about that? Was that a
Sure.
result of the
Sure.
the concrete structures, or did they do something else right?
No, it's just the concrete structure. It's just a bad news of concrete structures. Generally speaking, it's a you know, if it's down wrong, bad for the earthquake, but fire is okay. You know, California is the opposite. Wood construction doesn't usually collapse unless you do really bad. You know, by the earthquake. It's really rare, especially the houses. But the fire is a huge issue. I mean, Charles is going to talk about and talking about thousands of a simultaneous, you know, fire happens after the LA earthquake. That kind of thing is a huge deal, actually. And in a sense, insurance, there's insurance for this, right? The fire insurance will cover that. But to me, like insurance industry taking such a huge risk. To me, just like providing a little things makes a huge difference, like automatic shutdown valve on natural gas or propane or whatever it's out there, you know, stuff like that, which Japan did really well, you know. And so there are countries we can learn a lot from. And Japan's example of the how to manage that after fire, because they have the same issues. Their house is built by wood like ours. I think that makes a huge impact. It's very cheap. You know, that's something the insurance industry can really get onto it, doing it, enforcing it, or even pay for it. It's going to pay itself.
Great. Are there any other questions for Kit before we move on? Just want to say again, thank you, Kit, for always great presentations, great information. Really do appreciate it. Thanks for all your work.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Great. We'll move on then to item number 8, which is talking about adaptive reuse, another hot topic. And I'll turn to our executive director to make the introduction.
Thank you. Yes, recent efforts around the state have focused on adaptive reuse of underutilized commercial buildings for residential uses. We have joining us today the Structural Engineers Association of California, or SEAC. Their member organizations have been involved in the process in Southern California and in San Francisco Bay areas. We will be hearing in a moment from SEAC representative Don Shinsky and Ryan Kirsting, and they'll provide an overview of the efforts and the organization's perspectives. Just as a quick introduction for adaptive reuse, for those of us who are unaware exactly what it is, it's the reuse of an existing building for other than its original purpose. It optimizes the operational commercial performance of built assets, and in this case, oftentimes to assist with the housing crisis and usage of buildings that are no longer conforming to their initial use. And the considerations are the existing structure composition, what the functional needs are of that building and its areas in which it resides, the regulatory and zoning compliance, structural challenges, and market demand. Next slide, please. There is a current LA adaptive reuse ordinance being updated, and the SEAC will be talking a little bit more about that. As many of us know, the COVID issues have changed the retail and office spaces in downtown areas. Many of those buildings are vacant or partly occupied. In Los Angeles, the vacancy rate is over 26%. Which is totally more than 44 million square feet of office space. San Francisco is also actively considering rules to encourage adaptive reuse in their commercial buildings in their downtown areas for residential purposes. Here's an example of an adaptive reuse in California. This one was done in 2019 and approved by LA's City Council. As you can see there, will include some work and apartments, as well as office space and commercial space and parking. Next slide, please. The Mills Act was passed in 1972. It allows participating cities and counties to provide property tax relief for qualified historic properties. Local governments have to elect to participate in the program, but it provides homeowners or building owners a 40 to 60% annual tax savings for newly improved or purchased buildings. Those buildings have to be rehabilitated with seismic safety in mind, as well as affordable housing and promotion for them. There's 2 bills that are in process right now, looking to slightly amend the Mills Act. Both are the assembly bills. One is 2909. It expands the offering of financial incentives to property owners for commercial buildings greater than 30 years. And they must be reinvested and retrofitting and repurposing of existing buildings for new residential rental units. It's currently in the first chamber, and if passed, it would go on until 2036. Assembly Bill 2910 also would allow LA to adopt alternative building regulations for converting commercial and buildings and structures to residential use. They will need to work with the California Building Standards Commission and other state entities. It is also in the first chamber. If this bill is passed, it will go until 2029 or until a statewide adaptive reuse building standard is put in place. And now I will introduce both Brian Kirsting and Don Shinsky to provide a presentation on what their organization is doing in terms of adaptive reuse.
All right, thanks, Andy, and thanks to the commission for the invite to talk today. Many of you are familiar to me. You've seen me here before. I'm Ryan Kirsting. I'm a practicing structural engineer. Before I get going too far, I just want to make sure the mic looks like it's on. Do we have confirmation of people online in here? It should be. Okay, great. Here's my slide I've got here. All the way. Serious kudos to Kit. You're representing our profession very well, and the information you're sharing is spot on with all the work that SEOC is doing. And we appreciate how much we've been able to collaborate with you over the years. We also appreciate how much we've been able to collaborate with the commission. Seismic Safety Commission served a very important role in SEOC's perspective to educate not only just the public with resources, but also with our elected officials and helping them understand important decisions they'll be making. All right, so I'm Ryan Kirsting. I'm a practicing structural engineer here in California. Here in Sacramento locally, we also have a number of individuals, I think online, participating remotely today from our LA regional branch, Southern California, and our Northern California branch in San Francisco, Greater Bay Area. We think they were questions if you had specific questions about LA City or LA or San Francisco City ordinances. I'm not sure if they're fully connected. We hope that happens. If you have specific questions, we'll call on them. Where do I need to point the remote to you? Can you advance the slide if I just ask you to advance the slide?
Absolutely.
Next slide. So we're a large organization. We do focus our efforts at the state level, but we have very strong participation at the local level. So we really are engaged in public policy for a very holistic reason. While you might think of us as engineers and very focused on the numbers, we feel public policy and engagement with you and with our elected officials is a really important aspect of our profession. Being able to share our knowledge and work with our community partners to help our communities be more resilient in the face of natural disasters in California, particularly for earthquakes. Next slide, please. Like I said, we have been around for a while, almost coming up our 100-year anniversary. We formed from both our Northern and Southern California regional associations originally, and then we expanded at the state level with adding our Central California and our San Diego chapters as well. One of the aspects, again, I just want to reiterate is that while we are a statewide organization, when we do focus with Don Shinsky here as well, here in California, Capitol, in some of the policy actions at the Senate and the Assembly and the governor and all of our state agencies. We also have strong local participation. So City of LA, City of San Francisco have strong engagement from our local regions to help them with local ordinances that supplement the things we're doing at the state level. Next slide, please. Andy, thanks for the intro. I had this here just in case. We do talk about adaptive reuse and kind of some of the basics, but I want to make sure people understand adaptive reuse in terms of the building code context is already covered by the building codes, and the existing building code talks about conversions or alterations or changes of occupancy. So there are provisions in the California existing building code that would cover what we might all consider today and talk about today, adaptive reuse, maybe a little bit more specifically, say commercial office to residential. we'll talk a little bit about the effectiveness of the California existing code provisions as it comes to existing building safety. Next slide, please. So just as a reminder, you've heard me before present to you on things looking forward about what our codes could be doing. Kit was talking about things. You've all heard about function recovery and how we could be doing new buildings better. Any new building code initiatives, just to remind you, don't apply retroactively to existing buildings. That's probably amongst this group, that's probably well known. But I just want to make sure we understand existing buildings don't necessarily trigger updates or upgrades unless certain things are changed within them. So in terms of the current code language, there are certain thresholds that must be exceeded before an existing building has to become compliant with some sort of new code requirement. So those things you see here, changes in design load or altering a member capacity. Sometimes if there's a substantial amount of work being done throughout the building, but it's often a large percentage of the building being affected. And then also if for some reason a new configuration changes what we call irregularities, it changes the performance because it's not as regular anymore. But also if something increases in risk category, that would trigger things. So I would say if something was going from a office or residential to an emergency operations center, or if you were taking an old building and try to make it a fire station, you would trigger an increase in risk category. We're going to talk a little bit more about increase in risk category in a little bit more detail, just so you understand that. Okay, next slide, please. Most buildings, and I'll talk about mostly commercial, regular occupancy type buildings, most buildings undergoing renovations or alterations don't usually exceed those thresholds that are in the current building code. That's why you see a lot of local ordinances looking at ways to be more proactive about how do we address performance of existing buildings, how do we get them to be more compliant with current thinking and current codes. And so in particular for adaptive reuse, when you're thinking about commercial or residential risk category, we're not changing the risk category. Commercial buildings and residential buildings are the same risk category when we're talking about building codes. So that is not one of the thresholds that's going to be triggered to mandate some sort of change or upgrade in the seismic safety of the building. And quite frankly, it's human nature that many people just naturally try to avoid the other thresholds, that they will plan around them to say, we'll just work in a quarter of the building so we don't exceed that 50% trigger. Or we'll make sure that we're not cutting holes in critical walls, but we'll go do a lot of other work to other walls. So it's human nature that a lot of these thresholds don't require conversions at the existing buildings we see today to come up to speed or up to date with current codes. So I will give credit to many forward-thinking state agencies, DSA, HCI-OSHPD, the state of California for state-owned buildings, including UC and CSUs, the Judicial Council. There have been a lot of forward-thinking agencies at the state level have been thinking, hey, we need to be more proactive about that. So we're going to look at the risk about our whole portfolio of buildings that they own, and they'll think about a plan and a program to bring those buildings more up to date, or to look at the most critical buildings and make sure they're performing well. Other proactive and forward-thinking local jurisdictions like the city of San Francisco and the city of LA have been more, I would say, cutting edge in terms of adding additional triggers or thresholds to make sure, or even mandatory programs to make sure existing buildings in their communities maybe have a little bit higher performance than just allowing them to kind of pass by under the radar. So we'll note that the CEBC, generally people work around, but those of us who are concerned about existing building performance adapt new policies to make those more effectively implemented. Next slide, please. So a little bit about risk category. You heard me talk about risk category for regular commercial office and residential in the building code is called risk category 2. Things like fire stations, hospitals, risk category 4. If you're going from 2 to 4, you're going to trigger an upgrade in your existing building. If you're going from 2 to 2, from office to residential, you're not going to trigger a change in risk category under the building code definition. So you're not being mandated to change anything or to become more compliant with current codes because of that. So I just want to reiterate, risk category in the building code context is generally providing a similar protection in terms of prevention of collapse or probability of collapse. It maintains a certain percentage or probability of collapse, but that's not the same as what we would consider exposure. Risk exposure in terms of the actual negative impact or chance of negative impact to occupants of a building. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. Next slide, sorry. I was trying to transition smoothly. So risk exposure, FEMA has done a lot of work thinking about building occupancy models or building population models, how long you're in a building. And as an occupant, how much risk you're at based on the building you're in. And so while a given building might have the same percentage of collapse, you're going to be in different types of buildings more often than you are certain other ones. So when you're thinking about converting from an office building that you're in, maybe roughly 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, to a residential building that you're in maybe 12 hours, 14 hours of the rest of the day, plus all day on the weekends, you're changing your risk exposure because you're going to be in that building more often. The people in the building are going to be in the building more often. So it increases the chance of an earthquake happening while they're in the building. So the FEMA studies that they've done, and they've studied the population and how people move in and out of buildings over time, throughout the day, throughout the week. When you think about the risk exposure to occupants, there's a threefold increase in risk exposure for someone in a residential building than there is for somebody in an office building. So when you're thinking about, let's just say a high-rise office building in LA that might be thinking about being converted to a residential building, that actually is an increase in risk exposure because people are going to be in that building more often. But the building code doesn't trigger that because it's not a change in risk category. So I want to make sure we're thinking about not just falling into this, I'll say, building code context of it's no change in risk category, but it is a change in risk exposure. Okay, so that's why people are thinking about this a little more often, especially with the trend toward adaptive reuse. Next slide, please. So just the highlights, and Andy, you kind of started to mention some of these, so I'll highlight a little bit of what City of LA and what City of San Francisco are currently doing in addition to or supplements to the regular building code provisions. So the City of LA has provisions in place right now in their LA City existing building code that says all existing buildings, if you're changing from a commercial to a residential, all of those buildings shall be analyzed for what we call 75% of current seismic design forces. So there's no loopholes there. They're saying all of them shall be analyzed. Now, our Southern California section, CIOSP, is working with the City of LA Department of Building Safety to talk about how do we take that requirement and go and implement it effectively to make sure that people are thinking about, is that too large of a step to make? Is that too much to ask? But at the same point, we're trying to communicate that we're only asking it to come up to 75%. It's not even mandating that it come up to current code. There's already been a reduction of a little bit of the stringency of current codes by allowing this 75% of existing or of new code as its design standard. City of San Francisco has something similar. They have a threshold that they've added to their code that says, if you're doing non-structural alterations to a building, so you're trying to avoid touching the primary structural system, the beams, the walls, the things that make it stand up, but even you're touching maybe the non-structural things that are more cosmetic, the ceilings, the partitions, if you're working on 2/3 or more of the number of stories, then you need to think about evaluating it again to a reduced seismic hazard, but maintaining the life safety performance under that reduced seismic hazard. So City of San Francisco is taking a little bit different approach, but both of them are options or models for how we can think about being more proactive and more uniform in applying considerations about what we should be thinking about when we're reusing and adapting an office building to a residential building that's an old existing. Both of our regions, our NorCal CONC is continuing to talk to the City of San Francisco. CIOSP is having ongoing conversations with the City of LA to make sure we're thinking about cost-effective ways and cost-effective strategies to go about this challenge. We understand the urgency of housing crisis, and we understand the need and the opportunity to use the space that's available to us, but we want to make sure we're thinking about this in a very holistic perspective. Next slide. So again, based on what we've been doing at the local level, we at the state level have now come up with a policy that we believe in as an organization, that we recognize, again, the importance of housing, the importance of reuse of existing buildings. This is a very sustainable practice, but we're also very much focused on the resilience of our communities, not just minimum safety. So we understand that jurisdictions are going to be challenged to think about effective ways and creative ways to repurpose their office buildings into housing buildings. We would caution and encourage people to make sure that when you're thinking about that at a local level from an ordinance perspective, we don't want to minimize the quality of the review process. There's definitely things we can do to expedite the review process, but we can't minimize the quality of the review process. And we also need to make sure that we're considering to maintain, if not supplement and reinforce our existing mandatory and voluntary seismic retrofit programs. Like we said, those programs at the local level are extremely effective. Just generic building code effectiveness is much less effective. So we applaud the cities that have been proactive about this, and we certainly don't want to undermine the efforts that they've had in successfully adopting mandatory programs to improve the building stock and everything else. And then lastly, as we think about this moving forward, we think the conversation needs to consider the resilience perspective. If you're going to spend money upgrading a building for things that are amenities or changing the space with finishes and spending money in there, this is the best time cost effectively to think about, should this be the chance you get a better performance out of that building to support your recovery in the long run? Not just focused on initial performance of maintaining minimum safety, which we may not be able to get back into the building after that. Next slide, please. So with that, these are some of these additional considerations. So while we have a very formal policy statement, we also have a lot of talking points and ideas to bring to local jurisdictions, to bring to the commission, so we can talk to each other about strategies and priorities and policies. One of them, we just need to keep talking about it. And Kit did a great job of communicating this to all of you. Our basic building code performance objective is life safety and preventing collapse. That means you can get out of a building safely when an earthquake and after an earthquake hits. That does not mean you're going to be able to get back in your building necessarily. You heard about the red tags, the yellow tags. You heard about the downtime. This is something that we've been talking about more and more over the past 5 years. You've heard me present it here to the commission as well. We want to make sure we're not confusing even the good work that the city of LA and city of San Francisco are doing. We don't want to confuse that minimum safety threshold with a promise that you'll be able to get back into your building. And so as communities are thinking about how housing is not just a crisis right now for the immediate term, but how housing is critical for long-term recovery, we want to be able to have those conversations and inform the people making those decisions about those expectations and performance. Lastly, this mandatory programs, they really have been the most effective. Like I said, the existing building code requirements right now, people are getting around. It's no fault of theirs. That's the way the building code is set up. But if you really want to improve the performance of the existing buildings, you have to think about mandatory programs. Now, mandatory programs recognize there's a challenge. You can't go do every building all at the same time. So there's effective ways. SEAC has a list of types of building or types of systems that might be more vulnerable than others. You might be able to use that to help prioritize which buildings you focus on first. We also think it's important to think about vulnerable populations, those people that maybe don't have the resources or the means to be able to recover quickly. And maybe those types of buildings should be priorities to be not just safe, but more resilient as well. And then lastly, the good work at the local level, we really hope we can bring that to the state level. State building codes do have an opportunity for us to improve upon the model code. We don't have to just adopt what is good for the rest of the country. We should be ready to take good practice that's happening at the local level and help implement that at a statewide level so that not everyone has to go through the same political process at the local level. We recognize it will be customized to the needs of the local communities, but we should be learning from those best practices and incorporating those into statewide codes when they make sense. With that, I think we have some time. Next slide, just is the Q&A slide. Happy to talk about this more if my colleagues that might be online want to answer questions you might have about specifics of the city of LA or city of San Francisco. We can engage that as well. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. Thank you for that presentation, and it's very timely. And I see that Commissioner Miyamoto has his hand up. Go ahead, Kit.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Great presentation. Thank you. I have a couple questions or comments. Now, financially affordability is probably most important criteria to make this happen, you know, and otherwise nothing's going to happen. For example, give two examples. One is the sub-story ordinance. It's widely successful. Why is that? It was affordable. It focused on the sub-story, the parking area of the apartment complex, right? Average spending like $100,000, $200,000 for this multi units, you know, 20, 30, 40 units apartments. So it was affordable. So that's really matters, kind of pinpoint approach about them, you know. So yes, it was required, but it's affordable. So I think it's very important. So there's a broader support from a community in the commercial sector doing that. Now, I think the current program we have of the seismic strengthening up to 75% and so on. In our mind, structural engineers, we think it's cost effective, right? Okay, hey, it's cost effective. But in investor point of view, they're not. For example, I was helping one friend of mine, actually my ex-wife, to buy this apartment in a condo in LA. It was about 100 units built in 1970s, non-ductile concrete structure. And house unit costs about $1 million. And due to seismic strength and talking through the whole things, they're looking about $200,000 per unit on top of $1 million. Essentially, the homeowners reject that. No one doesn't have a $200,000 sits in there or borrow the money to do that. So no, it's going to sit there for probably the next 25 years. And I thought about it. What would be affordable point should it look like for $1 million set? $50,000. She would definitely go for 5%. But what does that mean for the $50,000 per unit, which is affordable 5% versus 20% of a replacement value? Well, for the 200,000 unit per times 100 is $20 million. Okay, you can do full seismics. You can seismic strengthening up to 75% building code or whatever, right? For the $50,000 100, that's a $5 million. It's less, but first $5 million you spend on over the $20 million, you can make a really impactful risk reduction program doing that. I think the program should be something about financial driven approach, something like that. Would you be able to use? Here in LA, there's an ordinance, passed, right? As you know, that all the non-ductile concrete structures, which means all the concrete structures built in prior 1980s has to be seismic strengthening. It's a 25-year timeline. Most likely, no one's going to do nothing to 25 years, or very few does. Well, someone really rich would do, but if it's most people can't afford that kind of things. So after 25 years passed, I bet you they'll keep pushing the deadline. Just like what happened in SB 1953 in the hospitals. The rich hospitals, they can afford to do things, replacement and so on. But the smaller, poorer hospital groups, they cannot do that. I think a financial consideration is probably the most important things if you want to make some certain actions to it. And mandatory, that's only can be achieved if the public want it. Government just kind of say, we're going to require this without no public support. Public support has to be there. So what's come from? Come from the, I think, commercial affordability. That's very important. So I think that if we want to make this some kind of program works, I believe the something about percentage of that value basis, spend the money. I think that should be okay. Something at that piece, and also combination of the communication program. Wider communication program will be how dangerous those buildings are. We have examples from New Zealand and all those places, in Japan even. And the communication piece, plus how affordable it is, to kind of create a market of it, doing it. I think something like that would be really worthwhile. And because housing crises are real. And here in LA, many office building, you're right, sits on empty, but no one has money to convert into it, because it's stopped by seismic. Many does complain that the seismic pieces actually stop everything for them. So, I think the something about value-based approach would be something really critical.
Great comments, Kit. And I think you're aligned with this as well. I think you need to make the conversation about total cost of ownership, not just initial dollar cost. And cost effectiveness absolutely is going to be a motivating decision maker. But we focus just on initial dollar costs. We're not thinking about the long-term performance of the building. The people who buy the building are now going to be given a building that's going to be built-in performance. It's going to have built-in damage when the earthquake does hit. Will they be able to afford that damage repair after the fact? That has to be part of the conversation as well.
Yeah, but Ryan, no one thinking long-term in California. People thinking about 2 years, 4 years, 5 years maximum. People think nothing happened during the time. We have to change the conversation. And if people aren't willing to change the conversation, then we have to make sure they understand what they're buying to the dollar. Yeah.
right? If they're only gonna spend a certain budget on it, we can't let them think that they're getting the same performance as a new building. And maybe that just is natural, but we have
Yeah.
to make sure that they understand they're getting something less safe and something that they're not gonna be able to get back into.
Trust me, Ryan. I'm your team, right? I'm doing this every day to convince people to the seismic strength and trust me, okay? It's just not easy.
But that is the
Okay.
rest of the conversation. That is the rest of the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Commissioner Silva?
Thank you very much for the presentation. This is I'm a local elected official. And I work extensively also with the League of California Cities. So we talk about this this is the flavor of the month legislation from the state legislature and governor who is significantly and increasingly worried about the lack of housing and the lack of affordability. Now, I'm not an architect, nor am I an engineer, so I try not to practice professions that I'm not licensed to without a license, but I think the presentation was trying to find the balance of adaptive reuse and the challenges that are presented with this legislation and the hope of the state legislature that this will help to be one of the tools in the toolkit to solve the housing crisis. But you're also struggling with that. And I'm just interpreting this with the fact that any use of older building stock may not meet life safety and re-accessing the building and getting back to business quickly. Adaptive reuse of an office building, first of all, I mean, because we've seen it at the local level. The properties that are coming in front of us are older building stock because they already have inherent problems because they're now Class C. They're not Class A or Class B, so they don't meet the standards of the business community for occupying their spaces. So they're already looking at, if I cannot lease it for office, can I reuse it for housing? But it has the same inherent structural problems that they had to begin with. But also an office building, it can't become a dormitory. You've got to do an incredible amount of it's not even retrofitting. It's like, these are individual units on let's take a 10-story office building. You can't just use the communal bathrooms and accommodate people living in them in separate units. So it's not like going from an apartment building tenant to a condominium where you're just changing the ownership structure of existing spaces. So we literally in Walnut Creek 10 years ago saw a 10-story office building demolished. It is now a 4-story residential building. They sacrificed, we have stringent building heights that were adopted by the voters. This 10-story building preceded it. It was sitting on a gold mine if it had been a Class A office building, but it was not. They could not afford to just repurpose and reconstruct it and save that extra 6 stories. They had to go to a 4-story building because it was too expensive. All right, I think we have to stay focused on explaining to the legislature that when they adopt these bills, they are putting these building code issues. When you go to rebuild and add bathrooms and shower, I mean, basically separate units on floors, you're changing the structural integrity of the building because you're now in the piping. This is where I'm overstepping my bounds, I know, but it's not a plug and play. So how is it that adaptive reuse wouldn't trigger all of these standards in the building code for the safety of the building?
So just one thing to clarify, my presentation wasn't on any of the current bills that Andy mentioned. I was more talking about the technical issues of just the challenges of adaptive reuse and some of the implementation aspects that you're bringing to attention. We know that there was the other bill passed, I think, last year that charged the HCD to develop a working group to think about adaptive reuse at a statewide code development sort of thing. And we're planning on engaging in that group to have to be part of these conversations. I think many of the challenges you're recognizing are the challenges we're all recognizing. That if you're going to try to change a building and to make it a new residential building, we have to recognize the bones are starting. So the structural engineer, we generally talk about, we're working with the skeleton of the building.
Right.
There's gonna be so much money being spent on the finishes of the building, the rest of the systems of the building. You're essentially making it a new building. It's gonna think it's having this new 20, 30, 50-year lifespan. So you're not changing the bones. And so we want to make sure we're having open conversations about that. So we can talk about it. And our group in Southern California has at least engaged in the city of LA's conversations to talk about ways to prioritize which buildings we should start with. Talk about prioritizing or allowing phasing and sequencing of single work to happen to make it a little bit more cost effective, or at least a little bit less of an upfront cost that can be done over a transitional amount of time. But I'm not saying I don't have answers for you. I'm almost agreeing with you that we need to be explaining to the legislature and to our elected officials that it's not as easy as just saying we're going to relax some standards here, because I'm not sure that's what the public's actually asking. I think the public's expecting, and this is partly why it's seeming so expensive, they're expecting a new building. And they're expecting that level of performance. So we have to find a way to come together with all the stakeholder groups to explain that and understand where we're going to have to negotiate and compromise to come up with a cost effective solution.
So I guess the question I actually should have asked you was, when you looked at those thresholds.
Yeah.
Am I just not understanding? It seems that having to take a 10-story office building that has a set of bathrooms at the center of each floor and turn it into living units with additional interior walls and additional load resulting from, are there more pipes? I mean, isn't this creating structural issues that would trigger the thresholds?
In my experience, and it's not been the exhaustive experience, in my experience, we're not exceeding the thresholds that are in the current building with adaptive numbers. So while we are adding pipes, there are allowances for changes to loads that are less than 5 or 10% of the existing loads. And so a lot of those changes fall just below those thresholds. When we talk about, again, risk categories not changing, right? When we talk about the amount of work happening in the basic building code language, the amount of work happening across the building also has a tie that you're actually changing the structural components of a certain percentage of the building. So if you're only going to change I'll say the interiors, including the piping and stuff, the mechanical systems and everything, you're not changing the structural components. And so as long as you keep the loads, the new weights below a certain percentage, as long as you're not punching holes in shear walls or taking out columns and, bringing in new beams to make the spaces more open or something, you're not always exceeding those thresholds that are in the basic building code. That's why the city of LA has had to go to their amendments. That's why City of San Francisco is exploring this. And it is the buzzword. It is the topic du jour, but there's no simple answer right now for it, except that if we're really trying to be thoughtful and trying to understand what the end user, whether it's an owner or a tenant, is expecting out of this, I think we have to be a little bit more open with the conversations about what we're getting from.
Hopefully you're talking to HCD about this and explaining that this is not so simple. Because they love adopting, and the state legislature loves giving us rules.
Yeah.
Now, where we have to have a certain level of this implemented. And it doesn't sound like it is on its surface. It looks simple and easy, and it sounds dangerous to assume that things were going to be okay. We have to be advising our state legislatures and regulatory agencies that it just isn't plug and play.
Correct. That's partly why we're here today. We want to help engage in the conversation. We know all of you are stakeholders and have representation back to different groups. And we'd love to have those conversations with more of these groups to be a part of that, to help them understand at least the engineering aspects of it. We don't have it right necessarily, but we want to at least explain what we're either expected to comply with or the performance that you'll get from the current code application. and then have a conversation if that's the performance people want. Other questions? Again, I think I also represent local government as a local, but I'm also an architect, so I've been one of those people that has done sheets and sheets of drawings over the years to prove that we're only touching 49.9% of the building, not 50%. And it goes to the what Kit mentioned regarding the financial aspects of where people go and how they get there. And I do think on the local level, I know City of Santa Rosa, for instance, up my way, they want to encourage city center growth, higher buildings beyond getting out of wood frame. So they waive or eliminate or lower development impact fees for anything above the 4th floor. So trying to do incentives like that, but also knowing that there are other powerful financial pressures, including interest rates and you know, all the like that come into play as well. And I can't help but think about, as we were talking regarding the risk exposure and thinking about, you know, all the San Francisco, at least, all the great, nice, big, high-rise residential structures, but thinking about when Kit gave his report back from Nepal, and granted, those were different residential structures, maybe the concrete structures, Kit about 12, 15 stories, that survived the quake fine, but no one could ever go back and live in. And I think it's a different thing for an office not being able to get back in their building than it is for people's homes and the impact on local government and how we respond to that. And I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but I'm curious. I take it that residential high rise, and I should know this as an architect, but I've never done a residential high rise. Same standards apply. There's no difference in terms of dealing with risk exposure, as you mentioned, not just the category.
From a seismic load perspective, I believe it's the same sort of approach from fire protection,
Right.
and egress and access and all those. There are different standards based on just the number of occupants. Obviously, you know better than I do, probably.
Yeah.
So there are some thresholds after the occupant load gets high enough. It might change from risk category 2 to risk category 3, where we start to increase our seismic forces just because there's more people in the building to protect them better. But you're absolutely right. Whether it's high rise or just, let's just say mid rise, multifamily, one structure impacts many, many families. And your points, your comments about post-COVID, all the data we have from FEMA is pre-COVID. Post-COVID building population models look much different. And we've been using our homes as our schools and our offices and our virtual doctor's offices. And I think we just need to keep that in mind as we think about what standards we're going to be developing for these residential.
Well, thank you for working on all that.
We're happy to engage, and it's just one of the many ways we're doing that.
Well, again, appreciate you being here. Appreciate the presentation and questions. If there's no other questions from the commission, just want to say thank you and move on.
Thanks again. Yep, thank you very much.
Next up is item number 9, which is our San Francisco Concrete Building Safety Program. So speaking of San Francisco, we have Brian Strong with us. Brian on line.
Yes.
Yep.
Appreciate that. And Laurel Matthews, who I think is also online. So thank you for being with us today and thank you for your patience.
Are we ready to go? I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing.
I think we're ready to go. Can everyone see
All right.
my screen?
Great. So we're going to tag team this a little bit. Thank you all for having us here. My name is Brian Strong. I'm the Chief Resilience Officer and also oversee the Office of Resilience and Capital Planning for the City and County of San Francisco. Laurel and I are both more on the policy side. We are also not structural engineers or architects, but I've been involved in these issues going on for 15 or 20 years in San Francisco, both in terms of the publicly owned assets that we have and publicly owned infrastructure, both horizontal, under the ground and vertical buildings, but also in terms of privately owned buildings as well. And I will talk a little bit about what's going on. If we can go to the next slide, just very briefly, I want to mention that, what our office thinks about resilience, in 2 different ways. Obviously it's how do we recover and how do we bounce back from disasters. as quickly as possible. And I think that's the more traditional way that people think about it. But also, how are we addressing stressors that are facing communities? So when I say stressors, it could be the age of our building stock. It could be the fact that it could be unaffordability, it could be transit, it could be social inequity, and those types of things that if once you have an event, right, once you have an earthquake or something along those lines, it's much, much more difficult to recover from because you haven't addressed those stressors. And often the recovery can be just as bad in many respects as the event itself. And we saw that, in New Orleans. We saw that to some extent with the events that happened in Puerto Rico, and also with some of the large earthquakes that happened, over the past decades. So our office is, we're a strategic. We do strategic planning. We coordinate among the various departments in the city and county, and we develop two sort of primary documents. One is our hazards and climate resilience plan. This is really our local hazard mitigation plan, and we've sort of adopted that to be more than just hazard mitigation, but also overall resilience. And then we also have our 10-year capital plan, which is how we're going to spend money on infrastructure over the next 10 years, and that includes geo bonds and other types of things. If we go to the next slide, and then if we can go again, and just a little bit more background before I will pass it off to Laurel. We started after our large, earthquake, Loma Prieta, we started to put together various retrofit programs that we thought were important to have. And our approach overall really has been sort of a 3 steps, what we kind of call 3 steps toward earthquake resilience. And one is facilitating a market in which earthquake performance is valued, right? So how do we recognize, and we do have some buildings in San Francisco that are built at 181 Fremont, I think, is an example, that have been built to withstand the most severe earthquakes we can have. And for a little while, that was the space, and I think the space there still is going at a premium for a lot of these high-tech companies that wanted to make sure they were up and running after a disaster. How do we improve that? 2, how do we nudge the market by requiring evaluations? We had private schools where we just required evaluations to happen, and those evaluations become public, and that encouraged a lot of retrofit work that was done, and we're seeing that maybe potentially happening with our concrete program as well. And then, of course, we have the mandatory programs retrofit by a deadline. This slide here shows the ones that we've implemented really since the mid-1990s, and the concrete one is the next in this sort of in this phase. I would just mention the soft spray retrofit program. I really concur with what Kit was saying. The cost to that, and it happened at a time when there was a lot of built-up equity in homes, made it much more easy to do. But I would also say we also had incentives worked into that program. We were we provided PACE financing, which is the first time it was used for earthquakes. We also allowed building owners to add ADUs, accessory dwelling units. So they could take some of those empty spaces that had new beams in them or other spaces in their buildings, and they could add apartments which could generate additional income. And that was used in somewhere in the neighborhood, I think, of 70% of the retrofits that were done. But this is a list of what we're doing. Again, it's a 30-year plan. I will also add, just because it came up, and I think, Laura and I could probably talk about every topic for several hours that you guys have already covered today. It's been a great meeting. We also did a tall building study, and this is sort of in relation to the Millennium Tower, I think that Kit mentioned, and also what Ryan was talking about in terms of building performance and how can we ensure better performance for our tall buildings. And that resulted in a number of recommendations. We worked closely with SEONC on that, just like we're working closely with SEONC on the concrete building program. But it did get into these discussions about retrofit triggers. And just like with the adaptive reuse program, we have a lot of buildings that will go right up to the 2/3 amount so that they don't have to do they aren't triggered, right? And that is the approach. So we're trying to find different ways to encourage more of the retrofits to happen. And we also had some discussions on cordoning there too. So thinking about how do you cordon an area where you have extremely tall buildings, and hopefully, avoid a situation like in Christchurch where the entire downtown was basically shuttered for 2+ years. All right, with that, we can go to the next slide, and I will pass it on to Laurel to go into a little more detail. I think this is gonna, shed some light on the challenges that we face when we're talking about a specific program or a program that's gonna address a specific type of building that's prevalent, very much so in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, but also throughout the state.
Thank you,
Go ahead, Laurel.
Brian. And thank you to the Seismic Safety Commission for allowing us to present. We were invited here today to talk about our concrete building safety program, the goal of which is to identify, evaluate, and retrofit the most vulnerable concrete buildings in San Francisco to protect against major structural failure. So this has been a several-year-long effort to develop this program. Some of the complexities, I think, have already been mentioned by others presenters, but this program was part of our, as Brian mentioned, our earthquake safety implementation program. It's kind of our next big step. There are two types of buildings that we're planning to address, concrete rigid wall flexible diaphragm or tilt-up buildings and non-ductile concrete buildings. And there's just been a lot of people involved. I won't go into the details on the project team, but it's been a multidisciplinary effort. The two types of buildings that we're aiming to address here, the first, non-ductile concrete. For this type of building, imagine like 2 to 10-story office and housing. It's actually much more diverse than that, but that's sort of the most common archetype in San Francisco. These retrofits are really expensive and complex. There's a lot of issues. Typically when you do these retrofits, people need to move out of the building while the work is done. So a lot of challenges here. The other type of building that we're aiming to address are concrete tilt-ups or concrete rigid wall flexible diaphragm buildings. These ones, think grocery stores, warehouses, auto body shops, basically low-lying, sort of wide industrial type buildings. And the retrofit here is a bit more straightforward. You just have to tie the roof to the walls a little better. That's my understanding. As a foundational step for this program, we developed an inventory of possible concrete buildings in San Francisco. Note that this one doesn't include tilt-ups. It's just non-ductile concrete. And this was really challenging. This is a really important step, but also extremely challenging to get a good inventory of which buildings are actually concrete. I will just share the highlights of what information we can see when we look at this. There's a big concentration, as you can see, in our downtown area. If you look at the red dots, there's this big concentration of residential buildings in our Tenderloin and Chinatown neighborhoods. Those are both very socioeconomically disadvantaged neighborhoods. There's also a green concentration in our financial district. So, lots of vacant office space, and the opportunity there is you don't have to relocate tenants to get this work done. The challenge there is, as multiple people have mentioned, not a lot of rent income coming in for those folks. So the financing is challenging. I will not go into too much more detail here, but the inventory that we have, while imperfect, has given us some really good broad trends for what types of buildings, concrete buildings are in San Francisco. I wanted to just pause here one more slide and talk about some challenges, because I know that inventories are a priority across the state. Lots of different cities are struggling with this or wanting to understand their risk better. So the purpose of our inventory was just to understand general trends in our building stock. We wanted to just inform our program design, figure out which buildings need to go first, what are the top issues we need to discuss with our working group. And there have been some challenges. So it's taken years of work and lots of technical expertise to compile this inventory from public sources, but there's still a lot of uncertainty. Concrete buildings are really hard to identify from the street or even from public records. So to actually identify which of these buildings are concrete, a structural engineer is going to need to review building drawings or do a walkthrough of each one of these buildings. And there's pretty big, the stakes are pretty high for getting this wrong, on both sides. So if we're casting our net too wide, we risk sort of unnecessarily devaluing buildings that are not really concrete. If we cast our net too narrowly, people might be living or working in unsafe buildings and not knowing. So it's challenging. It's challenging to do it as one city because you kind of put a target on your back. The public perception is that the risk is worse here versus over in Oakland just because we've done the inventory. Yeah, so we'll talk about how we're going to address that with the next step of this program in a few slides. But in the meantime, I wanted to just mention that because there's a lot of challenges with this program, we have been working over the past year and a half or so, or 2 years, with a working group of internal and external stakeholders. These are representatives of groups who might be impacted by a concrete retrofit program. So city and county staff, technical experts, residential building owners, commercial building owners, tenant representatives, Chamber of Commerce. We invited labor representatives and some builders and developers. This working group was aiming to represent the concerns of affected stakeholders, providing recommendations for program and policy design. Those are the main two functions that we got to. All this work with the stakeholder group. And I'll just mention that this photo is from a tour we did, walking tour of concrete buildings in October of 2022. All this work culminated in a report summarizing stakeholder engagement for this program. The working group developed 9 high consensus recommendations to the city about the development of this program. This report also summarizes the technical recommendations, and that was sort of our outcome. Those are the recommendations we came to around, like, how many years, if this were a mandatory program, how many years should people have to retrofit? Which buildings should have to retrofit first? What level of retrofit is appropriate? So those kinds of technical questions were wrestled with and summarized in this report as well. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I'll mention that the high consensus non-technical stakeholder recommendations focus on 4 categories. They focus on financing, communications, temporary tenant relocation, again, because to retrofit these buildings, tenants typically need to move out, and process streamlining. So some of these challenges that Kit has mentioned regarding permitting and just, process issues. Recently in April, an exciting step forward happened for this program. Mayor London Bree took a first step toward initiating this program and issued an executive directive. This directive asked staff to do 2 things. The first is to draft legislation which mandates the completion of a screening checklist. So you'll remember I mentioned some challenges with the inventory and figuring out which buildings are actually concrete. Our hope is that this mandatory screening program will give us a better picture of that. And then in addition, she directed us to publish retrofit standards in the building code for concrete buildings. And I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. So the part 1 of the executive directive, the mandatory screening, our goal here is really to improve our inventories of our concrete and tilt-up buildings. And so to give building owners who have been incorrectly included in this list, the list was obtained through a Public Records Act request and published on NBC. We want to give these building owners a chance to sort of officially remove themselves. The process here would be that an owner would hire an engineer to complete and submit a checklist, which specifies the building composition and some really basic information. We're thinking like half a day, a couple hours of work to maximum 1 day of work for an engineer. And then DBI would review these submitted checklists and track compliance with the program. The second part of the executive directive is to publish an appendix in the building code with the technical retrofit criteria that we developed with our technical consultant in coordination with the Structural Engineers Association of Northern California, which would provide a pathway to people who complete the screening form and discover, hey, I do have a concrete building and I want to do something about it. You know, there's no mandatory program in place yet, but I would like to retrofit in a way that is acceptable to the city and might, you know, maybe get me out of having to comply with a future mandatory retrofit program. I'm going to pass it back to Brian to just talk about some of our takeaways from this process and some issues that I think are worth discussing.
Yeah, and just to follow up on the adaptive reuse discussion, because Laurel was just talking, you know, it was mentioning the idea that people could have an idea of what they need to do. So one of the recommendations that we have that came out of the technical group was to think about a way to do your retrofit without having to pull everyone out of the building, which would save some costs. But basically we came up with two different ways to do the retrofit. And the opportunity for these building owners that they already have an empty building, they have an opportunity, they're already going to spend significant amounts of money to add in what the council member from Walnut Creek mentioned, you know, all the plumbing and all those different things. Why not do the retrofit then? That's the opportunity. And we wanted to encourage these building owners in our meetings with them. We had several of them. This was, you know, they agreed. This is one of the incentives that could really help them. Let's do that now. And then, you know, we would basically hold them harmless for 15, 20 years in terms of a new ordinance based on information that we have, so that they could do that with confidence that they're going to not have to do something, you know, in 5 or 10 years that would be unexpected. Anyway, if we go to the next slide, Laurel, thanks. So this is the key takeaways. I mean, concrete retrofits, the financing of it is a huge challenge. You know, we actually did a geo bond to help with some of the the
Unreinforced masonry.
Unreinforced masonry, thank you. The unreinforced masonry buildings back in the late 1990s, and it actually wasn't used that much because the banks came in and beat us. They said, oh, if the city's going to offer this rate, which I think at that time was 6 or 7%, which was a great rate back then. And the banks came in and said, you know what, we'll beat that. So it sort of worked in a strange way, but we're now talking about, you know, $200 to $300 a square foot. This is really significant. So how do we do that? And it's very challenging. It's really challenging as the Cal OES folks know, it's challenging to get money from FEMA for these types of work. So it's a big undertaking. And of course, the city is facing all kinds of other needs in terms of retrofit, in terms of climate change and those types of things too. We need better inventories. I know there's been legislation that's come up at the state a few times around requiring different inventories or helping cities do this type of work. I mean, we literally had old Sanborn maps that we had to have interns go and look at and then compare them to Google. To be honest with you, without Google Maps, it would have been even more difficult. So so that is a significant and that would be great, again, if that was something that was a little more citywide. As Laura mentioned, it isn't just one jurisdiction doing it on its own. Ongoing stakeholder communication, coordination, engagement is really critical. I mean, we've started early with stakeholders. We know we're going to need to continue to do that on and on. We have to build that trust to be able to be effective. And it's one of the reasons why we think our soft story program works so well too. When we did a lot of that stakeholder engagement and then we implemented it over 8 years. So we gave people time. We told them what to expect and we gave them time to sort of get ahead of it. And then, you know, development and implementation of these programs, you know, they span election cycles. And so we need to try to be aware of the politics, you know, and I mean, San Francisco right now, we are in a mayoral election year. There are actually several members of the board are also up for election. So we kind of recognize this is probably not a time that you are going to get a lot of political support behind a mandatory retrofit ordinance. But you can't, you know, but we know that these things don't follow election cycles, right? And we need to keep the pressure on. You need to keep having folks that are going to champion this work and making it clear that data and actually organizations like Earthquake Engineering Research Institute and SEOC are so important to keeping the pressure to do these retrofits and make them work. So with that, I know we've thrown a lot of information, but Laurel and I are both happy to answer questions that you may have. And we apologize, we're not able to be there in person. That was my schedule fault. I have another critical meeting this afternoon. But next time we'd love to be there with you guys.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Brian and Laurel. Thank you for the presentation and all the work. And I look to my colleagues and I see Kit with his hand up. Go ahead, Commissioner Miyamoto.
You're on mute.
Kit, you're muted.
Sorry. Well, thanks so much. And Brian and Laura, I mean, it's such a nice presentation, and I congratulate you what you guys doing. It's fantastic work. And especially I try to involve with all the community stakeholders. I think it's such a key part of it. And I think, Brian, what you're talking about provide a financial, try to provide a financial piece. And you know, I think, and what you guys talking about, that, you know, something straightforward worked so well, right? Like you don't see the problems of like the tilt up issues, because solution so simple, provide just little bolts, you know. Soft storage is pretty simple, provide fix this area, you know. URM, the unreinforced masonry is simple too, carpets and bolts, you know. So now the challenge is concrete. I think it's definitely challenging, all right. And I think you guys hit right on it. So it's all come down to financials. It's about the money. Is affordable or not? Is that, like you talk about that some of incentive you did for the homeowners able to use the put the what is that called, the alternative unit, the
Oh yeah, ADU.
ADU, you know.
Accessible dwelling.
I think it's
unit. Yeah.
fantastic. That's a great idea. So having an ADU, it's essentially more like additional income, you know, or additional value added to it, you know. So it's actually homeowners may gain a value for that set, you know. It's such a critical piece. What about, like I was talking about, something about the rather than just like a blanket about 75% of code or that kind of stuff, like 5% of value, 8% of value, spend it, because that seems small, but that's a huge impact and risk reduction piece of it, you know. Something affordable. And something about also, I think you guys did a great job in the communication piece. That's, I think, is really important, you know, kind of create a market almost, right? You know, but also what you're talking about, so interesting, the challenge against other cities, because you're competing with other cities, the other cities not doing it. So it seems like you guys might perceive it more riskier than other cities, you know. That's not true. You're much more ahead from that. So what do you think about, how do you overcome the finance piece? Because that's it. That's only one roadblock.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I wish there was an easy answer to that, Kit. There, as you know, there is, and I've been thinking about financing for again, decades. I mean, I think building in time is really important. So, you know, LA did their 25-year program, and I believe the 25 years just starts once they reach out or once they receive information from a building owner. We're probably thinking about similar types of timelines, because, and we do know in situations where building owners have done the work, you know, they actually, if they can, will try to do it floor by floor, and they can time it with leases.
Mm-hmm.
So, so enabling that type of retro, you know, supporting or enabling that to happen is going to be important. You also have to work really closely with the tenant groups that are in there. You know, most of the buildings in our inventory, and we haven't verified this yet, but most of the buildings are commercial. You know, the commercial is probably a little bit easier. But as I said, a lot of the commercialists that are going to be challenged are going to be the Class B and Class C buildings. The Class A buildings, a lot of them are already doing it, or they're already thinking about it. So how do we, you know, so how do we incentivize those types of buildings? And it may be inclusionary. There may be situations where it is more beneficial to tear down and start over. And if they do that, can we do that in a way that doesn't interfere with our preservation ordinances? With, you know, we have special permits around demolition. How can we make that, you know, how can we enable some of those things to happen so that ultimately we get a much safer building stock? So I've not thought much about the 5% value or those types of things. I mean, we do know that the building values, especially on the commercial side, change pretty dramatically. They can change really quickly. The residential side, they're a little more consistent. The big challenge on the residential side is really the, the single resident occupancy buildings, those lower income buildings. And then also the condo buildings. We have a lot of people are living in condoized buildings, and we saw what happened in Florida with Surfside. And the fallout from Florida, where other buildings, the condo owners are saying, we can't afford it. We're not gonna, even after seeing what happened at Surfside, they're saying, we don't think we can do that same type of work. So how are we able to work with, condominium owners, where you really have to have everyone on board, right, for it to happen?
What about tax, the property tax, 1%, 1.2%, whatever that would be? Can they use the money percent to do seismic strengthening after 10 years? That's 10%. That's a lot, I mean, you can do a lot on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your question. In terms of like giving them back
Yeah,
their property tax?
yeah.
I mean, there's a certain limitations on how much on our ability to give private property owners money. So can you reduce property taxes? That gets into a lot of different questions, because most of that money is going toward that. Well, a fair amount of it's going to be, is going toward core services. And so can you impact, what's the impact going to be on the core services?
Yeah.
When we think about our general obligation bond programs, those are relying on property taxes as well. So you have your property tax, you have the ad valorem on top of it, and that's how you're financing the retrofits of our hospitals, the retrofits of our clinics, all those other things that are also really important, for a community to be resilient.
Well, maybe half of it or something,
Sorry.
Anyway.
I just wanted to mention really quickly that we have received a grant from a hazard mitigation grant program grant to develop the first component of a financing plan. So to quantify benefits, understand which stakeholders these benefits are accruing to, and develop a financing strategies guidance document for building owners. So we are continuing to work on this, and we don't have sort of one single solution yet, but we are hoping to have some more direction by next year or the year after.
Great. Anyone else have any questions for Brian or Laurel? I just want to say thank you again. I think you saw we seem to have a theme of financing and affordability today with the presentations, but do appreciate that. I actually appreciate very much in San Francisco. I was going to say this earlier regarding the soft story, because I know that serving on ABAG, how San Francisco went about it, and I think it also quite honestly had to do with the percentage of value that one needed to put within the building, and the incentive with the additional units was much different than the attitude perhaps in the implementation in Oakland. So I remember that discussion going on at the time. I can tell you my extended family took advantage of that soft story ordinance and added 3 units to a 24 unit building now that is upgraded, no soft story vulnerability, and 3 additional units. So that worked well. A little harder to do, I think, with the concrete path going forward, but I do think incentives, streamlining, and giving the time and notice to allow people to make plans does go a long way. So I do appreciate that. So thank you for being here. With that, we're a little bit behind, so we're gonna take about maybe a 10-minute break and then resume with our last couple of items.
Construction, so not structural. Accessibility.
I did it building once. It's like a contract. Yeah. And no one wanted to do that. I was like, it's like, oh, my whole life. It was
What, it was a community college campus or?
it was a high school in Moran, and they built an outbuilding that brought all switchgear stuff for the school. I went to the city for a permit.
Yeah.
Sit up.
We, by statute. So our solution is that the building is to. The building is obviously, but we require fence so that it's protected from.
And I think it was. But it was, for a while there. Someone's got.
Well, look at that. No, local jurisdiction, so they just don't want district property.
Yeah.
They would touch itself here in where you can have.
Yeah.
Or touch.
Yeah.
But our authority doesn't extend to facilities. Occupied by faculty.
Good. Okay, yeah.
And likely we wouldn't want to, that's our category, we would hire. It would have been more costly to.
So I just had.
It literally. There was a couple of south. And that building looked like a barn.
It should be able to work.
Inside. This was. But it was in that, some part of the campus where. There was. Interesting project. Are we good online? All right, we'll get back to business. Thank you all. We'll move on then to item number 10. And this is earthquakes, climate, fire, water, California needs. All important aspects. This is going to be a video today that Dr. Scott is traveling, had prepared this presentation for us. If there are questions, we can bring those back next time round. But we wanted to make sure that we got this out today and we can go ahead and roll the tape.
It's not working.
With regard to. Hi, everyone. As I think you know, I'm actually somewhere over the Atlantic, perhaps Greenland right now, and I can't be with you. However, I've recorded my presentation and look forward to your feedback. Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Charles Scawthorne, and I'd like to speak to you today with regard to water supply and earthquakes. By way of introduction, this is my background. Many of you know me, but some don't. And I'm a structural engineer, worked on many kinds of structures. Also have been actively engaged in much research over my entire career, and these are some of my publications. Outline of my presentation today is the introduction, the effect of stress events on buried water pipe, and then I will speak to you about fire following earthquake, both the capacity side, firefighting water, and the demand side, seismic, with specifically seismic gas shutoff devices, or SGSDs. I will conclude with what I see as California's needs in regard to these two aspects. The first topic I wish to speak to you is a report of a research that I recently completed that was sponsored by the Water Research Foundation and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. The research was on the effect of major stress events, specifically earthquakes, on buried pipe service life. There's a report there, it's available. And the genesis for the work had to do with the 2014 Napa earthquake. This is the intensity patterns on the left. And a question emerged from that. And that question is shown in this graph. The y-axis is the probability of failure of buried service pipe, and the x-axis is time. And the curve is the normal so-called bathtub curve, which says that immediately after installation, when the pipe is brand new, it may have a relatively high failure rate because of construction defects, material defects, and so on. If it doesn't fail very soon, then the probability of failure drops to near zero and continues at a very low probability for many years during the service life. And then as finally the pipe and the material wear out, the failure rate starts to climb again, as shown on the right. And this is as I said, the bathtub curve. It's true not only for pipe, but for cars, any kind of mechanical installations, and so on. By the way, also for humans with infant and aged mortality. For water utilities, they typically have a policy of a certain repair rate. And if the repair rate is above that threshold, then they will repair the pipe. If it's below, then the pipe doesn't need to be replaced. And the normal assumption is that the repair rate is very low until there's an earthquake. That repair rate will spike way high. And at that point, they need to repair all those pipes where the probabilities of failure have gotten very high. And then assumption is that following the earthquake, we return to the same bathtub curve. However, that assumption has never been examined until this research. And the question is there as the pipe experienced a higher probability of failure due to the earthquake for many years afterwards? In other words, in effect, has the earthquake aged the pipe sooner than it should have? And so what is that delta T for the probability of failure, the point at which the probability of failure exceeds the threshold and the pipe would be replaced? If that delta T is at many years, then the pipe has prematurely aged many years due to the earthquake. But this has never been examined or even actually thought of before. The Napa earthquake, the Napa Water Department did an excellent job maintaining pressure, and immediately in the few days, as shown in the upper graph, in the few days, the first 2 weeks after, they repaired virtually what they thought were 100% of all their leaks and breaks in the pipe. At that point, they went to FEMA and got disaster aid reimbursement for their costs. However, as shown in the lower graph, over the next year, what they saw was the repairs they had made during the first 2 weeks, which is shown in the yellow area, were actually only a fraction of all of the breaks and leaks that they were going to have to repair over the next year. As a result, they went back to FEMA and asked if they could be reimbursed for these additional repair costs due to the earthquake. And they were denied. They appealed it. I was brought in. I did an analysis that showed that this was due to the earthquake. They were still denied. As a result of that, I became interested in this question, went to Los Angeles Department of Water Power and the Water Research Foundation, and I was able to collect data from 5 major utilities in the Western United States. Of course, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power provided much of the data. They were sponsoring the research, but San Francisco, Seattle, Portland, and the East Bay Municipal Utilities District supplemented this with roughly an equal amount of data. Keep in mind that LADWP is the largest water utility in the United States. Now, some of these utilities and their systems had been affected previously by earthquakes. LADWP by the 1994 Northridge earthquake, East Bay Mud in San Francisco by the Loma Prieta earthquake. Seattle could be argued that Nisqually, although it was a very minor earthquake, affected them. Portland has not been affected by any earthquakes. I won't go through all the research. The findings were that earthquakes definitely decrease service life. For Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, this decrease is on the order of 40 years. In other words, the Northridge earthquake in the strongly shaken areas has resulted in the fact that those pipes will have to be replaced about 40 years earlier than if the earthquake had not occurred. And this dollar loss represents, when you think of present values and the amortized cost of the pipe and so on, 31% of the entire replacement value of the pipe strongly affected by the Northridge earthquake. It's many billions of dollars. Implications are that total costs of repair are underestimated by water agencies and by FEMA. Why? Both only quantify costs for the brief post-earthquake emergency period. The significantly larger disaster aid funding is justified, recognizing that system life is shortened by the stress event, the earthquake. This is something I call to your attention because I believe, and I will summarize at the end, that the commission is in a unique position to bring together the water agencies in California to recognize this problem and develop policies so in the event of a future major California earthquake, these water agencies are properly reimbursed for their real losses. Let me move on. Water, of course, is a factor in the fire following earthquake problem. And fires after earthquakes not only were in 1906, but they continued as shown here in 1989 in San Francisco in the Loma Prieta earthquake, in Kobe in the 1995 Kobe earthquake, many fires, significant amount of loss in Japan there. And as shown in these AI-generated figures, will occur in the future in San Francisco, in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area, Berkeley, and in Southern California, as shown here. A little dramatic perhaps, but actually when you compare it against the real photographs, not very dramatic at all. And again, another view of Southern California after the next major earthquake and many fires breaking out. And these images do not really reflect the fact that one high-rise building alone will be a huge problem for any fire department. This is, for example, the 1991 First Interstate Bank fire for the tallest, at that time, high-rise building in California. And this required 40% of the Los Angeles City Fire Department's personnel and resources to fight this one fire, which is only on 4 floors. So fires in high-rise buildings like this, I've spoken with many fire departments, they will not be aggressively dealt with after an earthquake. They will just try and get the people out, and that's it. So the property loss will be huge. In all of these situations, water supply has been a major factor. As we see in the upper photograph on the right, it was in the 1994 Northridge earthquake on Balboa Boulevard. And as we see in the AI-generated image on the below hand, it will be in the future again. There's no doubt about that. The water system damage here, you can see it here, 1906 was a factor, 1989 Loma Prieta, there I am with one of the broken pipes, in the Kobe earthquake, and projected in the future, these are each of those red lines represents a broken section of pipe that is estimated that will occur in a San Andreas large earthquake, effectively a repeat in 1906, in San Francisco's potable water distribution system. This large number of breaks will basically drag down the entire system, and there will be dry hydrants almost entirely throughout the entire system of San Francisco, which means firefighters will not have the water to fight the fires. This is a major factor in fires after earthquakes. This is a book I edited for the American Society of Civil Engineers on this topic. And I've done several major studies. If we look at Los Angeles, the Los Angeles basin area, people looking at this photograph see many different things. Los Angeles Airport, for example, or the port area and so on. When a firefighter looks at it, or I look at it, what you see is huge amounts of fuel. People think of Los Angeles as sprawling and spread out, but look at the building density here in just an ordinary part of central Los Angeles. Not only are there houses, but there are the additional buildings in the back, which are now being further filled in with ADUs, further increasing the fire hazard. So there's a huge amount of fuel there that is just waiting to burn. I analyzed all of this in the USGS-sponsored 2008 shakeout study, examining the effect of the San Andreas earthquake in Southern California. And on average, there's about 1,200 ignitions that are anticipated to occur in the area shown here. And each of those are represented by a little red triangle. The yellows and greens and reds are the shaking intensities. This will result in losses of about $60 billion in direct structural replacement cost losses, not to take into account the business interruption and other effects. I've also looked at it for the Hayward event in the East Bay of San Francisco. This is a rupture of the Hayward fault. And this is the where ignitions will occur. The darker the red, the more ignitions. And each of these polygons each represent the response area for one fire station, one fire engine. This is where the water will be lost, where red means there'll be basically no water capacity for firefighters. And of course, that coincides with the heavily shaken area. So the losses are shown here. And the losses are on the order, again, of many tens of billions of dollars in losses. It's all documented USGS report. As a result of this, I organized, as part of it, a workshop for all the fire departments in the Bay Area at the University of California's Richmond Field Station. The special equipment that San Francisco, Berkeley, and Vallejo fire departments have, so-called portable water supply systems, were demonstrated for all these departments. We wanted to bring to their attention this situation. This is the only time all of these departments have ever exercised together. So, the commission, sponsored about that time a study that I was able to perform on water supply in regard to fire following earthquake. And the findings of that were that water and fire agencies see earthquakes as a very important issue. They certainly give it lip service. They recognize that. They could be better informed as to earthquake risk. The fire departments and water departments typically, I shouldn't say typically, in many cases, don't really understand the impacts on their buried water distribution system or the number of ignitions they're going to have to deal with. And the interaction or communication between them is not as good as it could be. There's relatively infrequent communication. They consider their normal water supplies as seismically unreliable. The water departments know they're going to have many leaks and breaks and they may lose their pressures, but they don't tell the fire departments. The fire departments assume they're going to lose their normal water supplies, but don't ask the water departments. The water supply could be improved, but efforts are piecemeal and it's not coordinated. And often they're really reinventing the wheel that other departments have already developed systems for that. And moving water from the sources of water, such as reservoirs or a lake or the ocean, to the fire ground is very difficult, not well thought out by these departments, not adequately equipped or regularly drilled. There are some departments who are ahead of the curve on this, primarily San Francisco. This is the so-called CAPS study in San Francisco. San Francisco, as to quote a former fire chief, is a city built to burn. It's all wood construction, very dense. I won't go into all the details of that. As a result of this study, San Francisco also asked me to look at a study of options to reduce post-earthquake fires in San Francisco. I developed 26 different options. We had a working group to examine these. I won't go into any of that detail, except simply to say that I will talk about two measures that came out of it: how to enhance water supply reliability and how to reduce ignitions, specifically with regard to gas shutoff devices. I've already pointed out that San Francisco is going to lose its water supply. As a result of that, following the 1906 earthquake, San Francisco built an almost unique system, so-called high pressure or auxiliary water supply system, is shown here, and it serves mostly the portion of San Francisco that existed in 1906. There have been a few extensions, but large parts of the city are still not protected by that. They also put in many underground cisterns. I'll explain what they are in a moment. The blue dots are cisterns that have been built decades ago, and the green stars represent cisterns that were built as a result of recent bond measures, which were based on my analyses. Also now, again, using my analyses, the plans for extending the system to the remaining parts of the city are well along, and bond measures have been passed to fund these. So the rest of the city will be protected in San Francisco. The cisterns, by the way, this is what they look like. They're underground tanks. They contain about 75,000 gallons of water, which is a 1 hour supply. Above ground, they simply is a circle of bricks on the street to show where they are. San Francisco has about 300 of these cisterns spread throughout the city. A wonderful amount of emergency water supply for fighting fires after earthquakes. Los Angeles, the East Bay, and so on do not have any cisterns like this. Tokyo, for your information, has 14,000 cisterns. And this is how the cisterns are used. They open a manhole, drop a hose down, pump out the water, use it to fight a fire. And to extend the reach of the cistern, San Francisco has now purchased a new hose tender, shown here, brand new. And Cal OES is very much in tune with what's going on here. And I think they may be attending the meeting today, and they can speak to you more about this. But what I would suggest is that there ought to be a statewide fleet of these distributed to various fire departments in seismic areas throughout California. And these can be served not only after an earthquake, but of course for wildland fires, also, for example, for dewatering after a flood and other events like that. San Francisco is not the only city. Vancouver, Canada, in the 1990s, has built a dedicated fire protection system, shown here, map on the right, and it's smaller than San Francisco's, but still covers the downtown area. And the photograph on the lower left is one of the pump stations. It's completely underground, not obtrusive at all, and operates automatically. I was the seismic consultant on this project. I've also proposed that Los Angeles develop a similar high-pressure saltwater system with pump stations at the ocean and running the pipes along the flood channels in LA. The water runs downhill when it rains. You push the water back uphill and use it for fighting fires when the water system in LA fails. But this has not been widely received yet. Now, I'd like to move on to the topic of reducing the ignitions, the demand side of the equation. Let me give you this quote from Dickens and David Copperfield, that if you have an annual income of 20 pounds and an annual expenditure of 19 pounds, 6 shillings, the result is happiness. However, if you have an annual income of 20 pounds and an annual expenditure of 20 pounds and 6 shillings, the result is misery. In other words, in that story and in life, as we all know, in our checkbooks or many other situations, the capacity versus the demand is the issue. If your capacity exceeds, such as water and firefighters, your resources exceed the demand in terms of ignitions and fire spread, the result is happiness, as shown here. The demand on the left being less than the capacity, the losses are very low in the green area. And as the demand starts to exceed the capacity, the losses start to increase exponentially, reach a tipping point. And in recognition of this, when we recognize that about 1/3 of all post-earthquake ignitions are natural gas related, if we can eliminate all or most of those gas related ignitions, the tipping point for earthquake conflagrations is significantly shifted to the right, and we're much less likely to suffer major conflagrations. Japan recognized this decades ago. In the 1980s and 90s, Tokyo Gas Company divided its gas distribution system into 3,800 different small blocks, and they installed seismometers at each of those. And if the earthquake shaking exceeds a certain threshold, those blocks are isolated by automatic valve closure, and the gas will fuel the fires. And they also, after the 1995 Kobe earthquake, mandated that every gas meter in the country be replaced with new gas meters with a built-in seismic gas shutoff device, which is simply that small black button. Well, actually, sorry, it's an internal device, but if there's a false trigger by a truck going by or something, then you can reset the device yourself by just simply pressing that small black button on the upper left of the meter. And the instructions, as you can see in the photograph on the right, are wired to the meter so that they explain how to reset that. But however, I met with Osaka Gas, Tokyo Gas, and Japan Gas Association to study this whole situation. And they have reported that this is a very successful system. It's been in place for 30 years. and they have very few false triggers, and it works very well in the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, for example. Here are the instructions from Tokyo Gas about how to deal with the situation after an earthquake. Just not a problem. In California, the California Building Code does not require gas shutoff devices of any kind, even for new construction. They leave it up to when such installation is required by a local ordinance. So in other words, it's at the local level. And for example, these are required for new construction or major renovations in Los Angeles or Berkeley, but they're not required, for example, in San Francisco or many other jurisdictions. As a result, homeowners, either at their option or in LA or in Berkeley, are mandated when they're doing major reconstruction or new construction to purchase and install this little red box on the downstream side of the gas meter. You can show it here. This results in sometimes absurd situations. We see here at an apartment house 36 different gas meters, each one of which has this little red box installed next to it. And as a result, so these devices cost, including labor and materials, about $750, $500 to $1,000, somewhere in that range, each to be installed. Versus if you had it installed in the meter, the cost of having it built into the meter is on the order of $10. So the single apartment house on the right, for example, with 36 meters, has probably spent in excess of $20,000 installing these seismic gas shutoff devices on this bank of meters. Whereas if they'd installed them, if it had been in the meters, it would have been less than $1,000. When you extrapolate that to all the seismic areas of California, the wasted effort with these red, somewhat clunky boxes is billions of dollars. California's major gas utilities have distribution systems, unlike Tokyo Gas's, that have mostly manual valves, almost entirely manual valves, which means someone has to go out to close the valve if there's a leak or a break. And we've seen this in the San Bruno transmission line gas leak, gas break and explosion, which killed 8 people, or in many other situations in California cities. So they're very slow to isolate the leaks, whereas in Tokyo Gas, they'll be isolated immediately. The utilities have installed so-called smart meters to eliminate manual meter reading, but they intentionally decided not to include meters with built-in seismic gas shutoff devices. They missed a great opportunity there. And so therefore, their guidance is very neutral. They have on their website showing you that if you want to, you can go ahead and install one. It's your issue, your problem, your decision. They don't want to have anything to do with it. And they will often cite the so-called relight problem, that if all gas meters have built-in seismic gas shutoff devices, it will take years to reinstitute gas supply to all the customers, which is a gross exaggeration. The relight is not that big a problem. And I can go into more detail on that. So I believe seismic gas shutoff devices are not needed statewide. They're only needed in areas of high building density and high seismicity. Let me explain. Most earthquake ignitions are like a virus. There are relatively few initial infections or fires. Risk of a house burning down due to the fire in that house is very low. However, in densely built up areas, few initial fires will spread building to building like a virus contagion. And if you have a seismic gas shutoff device, it won't do you any good if your neighbors also don't have a seismic gas shutoff device. Their houses will burn and they will start your house on fire. The seismic gas shutoff device does not prevent spread from another building. Once your building is on fire, the SGSD is irrelevant. All houses in an area need to have seismic gas shutoff devices, just as everyone in COVID or situation needs to wear a mask. Let me illustrate. There's a bunch of houses. The green represent houses with seismic gas shutoff devices installed. The blue are ordinary houses without seismic shutoff devices. After the earthquake, there are a few ignitions. If the firefighters, will be very busy and perhaps won't be able to respond to these fires. And even if they do, they may discover, quite likely they will discover, they don't have water because the water system has gone dry. Therefore, these ignitions will spread first within the houses, And then they will continue to spread and continue to spread and continue to spread and so on until we've got a major urban conflagration, just as we had in 1906 and we've had in other situations. And the seismic gas shut-off devices on the few houses that had them installed were a waste. They were irrelevant. Now, if the houses are spread far apart, such that a neighbor's house burning does not ignite your house, such as we have in certain in rural areas and in the very more less dense suburban areas, then seismic gas shut-off devices are irrelevant. Because the probability of any one house having a fire is very low. So what we need, a study is needed to overlay seismicity and building density to identify precisely where seismic gas shut-off devices are cost beneficial. So in summary, California needs a statewide approach. We need to enhance post-earthquake capacity, which I see as primarily water supply. Without adequate water supply, firefighters are irrelevant. So we need to develop policies to maximize post-earthquake disaster aid, such as Napa did not get. We need a uniform assessment of the fire following earthquake risk across the state and the water requirements. We need to develop water and fire agency portable water supply system task forces, which Cal OES is very much in favor of. And we need to assist water utilities to develop resilient grids. There are many things that are needed here. I think simply the first step is to get together a workshop of all the major water agencies in California to discuss this issue, point this out, and develop a plan. And I would suggest that a good place to do this and to organize this would be the Pacific Earthquake Engineering Research Center at UC Berkeley, which is working already with the commission. We need to also reduce the post-earthquake demand, that is, reduce the gas ignitions. And to do that, we need to identify where seismic gas shut-off devices are cost beneficial and that would then provide guidance for local jurisdictions. We need, therefore, to fund a study. I would suggest the commission fund a study based on building density and seismic hazard. And for example, I would love to do that through the auspices of the Pacific Earthquake Engineering Research Center. Two last points I want to speak to. Recently, I requested, I made an invitation to the commission for a commission member or staff to serve on a project that I'm proposing to the USGS having to do with climate change and earthquakes on an advisory panel for that. And this is the proposal. I think you're aware of this. And we identified in the proposal that Director Evertson had tentatively accepted the invitation pending the approval, your approval. I think that may be on the agenda today, and I ask for that approval. I want to thank Andy for her support on this, and I look forward to proceeding on that basis. Secondly, I haven't even mentioned wildland urban interface, and I'll just point out this, as we all know, is an ongoing problem in these California fires and in the Lahaina fire. And I'll just point out the problem in effect is getting worse, not only due to climate change, but in 1991, the East Bay Hills fire, the recovery was relatively quickly. Lahaina, they spent 6 months simply removing the debris, including all the hazardous materials. In other words, regulations and requirements have increased dramatically in the 30 years since the 1991 East Bay Hills fire. And in future fires, recovery is going to be that much slower. Well, it looks like it's about time to jump off. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And I look forward to any questions you may have. I'll be happy to meet with anyone individually or a next commission meeting to respond to your questions.
Besides me saying thank you to the screen, I just want to let people know that Charles will be with us in our next meeting. He'll be here in person, I believe. So that if you do have any questions that came out of this, it'd be great if you could actually put them in the email directed to staff. And we'll make sure that we can have that discussion then. Obviously, another important aspect of everything that we're talking about. And again, another theme of financing and affordability, this time in pounds and shillings, though. I thought that was interesting. So all sorts of monies are needed in all sorts of denominations. We will move on, though, to the next item, which is speaking of which, it was mentioned in that previous that there's one city that has done quite a bit. No doubt because of 1906 and beyond, but San Francisco is really ahead of the curve, as you heard. And we are lucky to have Darius Luttrell, the Deputy Chief of Operations from the San Francisco Fire Department here. Apologize if I butchered the name, but very much appreciate you being here. Appreciate your patience. Look forward to the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commission. I'd like to follow, you're gonna see it on video, but kind of look forward to the meeting, but unfortunately, maybe next time. We'll go to the slide. So the presentation is fire following earthquake. This was originally presented to Fire Scope, and after that, I was asked by Callaway to present for the opportunity. It wouldn't be a presentation by the San Francisco Fire Department if I didn't stand in front of a picture of a big old fire and grandstand slightly. So I'm Darius Luttrell, Deputy Chief Operations. I've served in the city for 26 years. Operations Chief oversees fire suppression, airport training, fire prevention investigation. But my previous job was as the bond project manager for earthquake safety and emergency response bond. So a little familiar with the supply system. The problem obviously is a fire following an earthquake, and 80% of the damage is assumed to be the configuration that's going to come out. I was edified by Commissioner Miyamoto's presentation earlier. The percentages of buildings that collapsed or suffered significant damage, I imagine, will be pretty much the same in the city of San Francisco. The problem has always been fire following. Scott Thorne done a ton of research on this, and obviously some of his study has led to the continued evolution of our water supply system and the response to fire following. So I just wanted to point that out. It goes to the modeling, and so in his presentation, he represented it as a small number of starts, but if you go to his slide that showed LA, I think 1,200 or 12,000 are, that's a lot of fires. I'm gonna go with that's a lot of fires. So it's a number of starts that will resolve into a much smaller number of large fires. But then the one or two that result in something like the approximate configuration, multi-block fire, even if it's just a couple, you see the inverse in the end. So the impact of these fires will be loss of life, will be loss of capacity of the city to recover, will be tremendous drains and economic loss. Luckily, the San Francisco Fire Department is built entirely for this purpose. The fire department is built on a tradition of conflagration. The city burned 3 times completely before the fire in 1906. And even anticipating the fire following and the effects of an earthquake in the city, the chief had proposed a water system that was developed after his demise and after that earthquake. And we remained that fire department. We've evolved. We have a tremendous amount of initiative going forward. We lead the nation in community care medicine and street teams, and we do a ton of things. But at our heart, just like the cute leather helmet over there that we're still wearing, we are built to put out the fire. So when Dr. Scott showed his beautiful map, I'd like to get a t-shirt of it that was polygons, colored polygons of the response areas of fire engines in the Bay Area. You could see very large polygons everywhere else, but if you get to the city of San Francisco, they were mashed together because you're sitting on a fire station basically per square meter. And that's our population density, but that's because we're still acknowledging the risk of fire in this city. We are wood built on wood. We are wood built on hills. We are wood built with wind in our back. So we still have our station per square mile. We purchase and maintain equipment that has a higher capacity to fight fire than most cities nationally and regionally. This includes our fire boats. This includes the other equipment I'll get to when I talk about our portable water supply system and our hose tender system and some of the other things. It also includes our staffing. We can have all the water in the world, but we don't have anybody to apply the water. So we've been able to maintain as an insurance policy, we've been able to resist the budgetary demands year over year and the cycle of boom and bust that the state's seen over here, to maintain our staff. And we'd like to expand if we can, but that's what. So just speaking on ignition, the doctor covered it quite adequately. Gas and electric fires are going to be common post-earthquake. We do have some seismic shutoffs in the city. They are by code and a lot of occupancies. I won't quibble with it. But we're still going to see significant strikes. And I do think that there's a evolving problem, which I could probably have a study on this in the next 10 years. Post insult to this building, all of these battery storage devices, a significant number of them will likely result in ignition also. This is an emerging problem for us in the city. Just people crashing their scooters leads to scooters catching on fire when they charge them. I can't imagine the damage to the structure or a significant amount of these structures wouldn't lead to the cascading another emerging fire. So the first piece in fighting fire after an earthquake is a discovery of the fire. And I put both of these dramatic photographs here because these are the arrival photos from our first units on the scene of these two fires from last year. The reporting of fire, even with the advent of cell technology, all the ways that people could tell us there's a ginormous, a hugantously ginormous fire burning across the street from their house. They have so many ways to do it, and yet this is how long we're already living for a fire. Post earthquake, I can't imagine that. There's all the studies about everyone else assuming that somebody else has made a phone call, there will be an interruption of communications post earthquake, but something is going on that we're not getting a head start on fires generally. Then with the earthquake, I can imagine. So what we've done is we're embracing this and we're kind of going down the path of doctrine change. There was a period of time where, as I said, we've expanded our capacity, we've taken on a number of different roles and post 9/11, post Katrina, our capacity for urban search and rescue dramatically increased. It's a huge part of the reason I'm standing here, and we embraced it wholly. But we kind of had omitted our primary, which is go find the fire, put the fire out, and then we can do all of the other wonderful things for the city of San Francisco that we can do to aid in the public. We could leverage technology. There are ways that if drone technology, fixed cameras would be an asset to us. That's exploratory. And then, of course, we have a robust neighborhood emergency response team. It's another place where we kind of lead the nation in the development of this program. And we will definitely be using these volunteers to go and report any starts they can find and greatly increase the eyes that we have on this program across the city. We have abandoned some of our older technologies. The street box system is not functional. Don't let anybody tell you it's not. But these street boxes sat at most intersections in high dense areas of the city or in proximity, at least a block away from those people's houses. But if they pull this street box and it was an antiquated technology, it's just a spring that taps out a code that was transmitted by a copper wire. It was long, but it required maintenance. So there's no more. And then again, as I said, their ability to assist us to get the report in. Our response to a fire post earthquake starts at company level and company mission, kind of the inverted chart. Every fire officer in the city of San Francisco post earthquake understands their responsibility to find and put out any fire in their district, which will mean bypassing people stuck inside of a flat structure, which would be bypassing people who are having a cardiac event because of the earthquake, which would be bypassing, many things that we wouldn't be bypassing. Like the fire and its capacity to grow and resulting conflagration comes in right away. And then them having the discipline stay in their district, even when they see they call them smoke across town, not to get drawn, I don't want to blame, but stay in their district. That's how the company. Once that is resolved, city's broken into 10 battalions. These 10 districts have just been transformed over to the emergency response districts for a DEM process. So our battalion is the disaster response man for the city system. And then it will be resolved to the branch, so that I have 2 assistant chiefs that control half of the city essentially. They will become basically the chief of the north and the chief of the south. That decentralized command and control structure will allow them to be more effective. And then as the day goes on, we can start to balance, shift resources across the city between them, because they have eyes on it, they have direct information, they're not getting a phone call, they're not trying to interpret the message from somebody calling 911. For the suppression of this fire, it's the place where we are going to find our biggest struggle. We have our staff, we have maintained staffing and equipment as I spoke. But the system that you see, this large hydrant that I'll get to in a bit, this auxiliary water supply, emergency firefighter water supply system is built on the need for basically deputizing the fire. This is a system built so that as something expands and grows, it is not the sole response of that single fire engine in the neighborhood, but the ability for them to say, hey, see that hose right there? Could you please sit on that hose and spoil water at that big old fire over there? These pieces of the puzzle are slowly eroding over time. The brass fitting that this young firefighter is attaching to this hydrant, called a Gleason valve. This Gleason valve is $70,000 by itself. It's basically a beloved antique. They work, they're entirely effective. But when you present it to somebody and say, hey, could you build us one of these things? I'm mystified and got they cannot figure out how somebody tinkering away at night in a workshop somewhere in the city same system came up with this wonderful thing that they cannot duplicate for less than $100,000. So we are in the process of trying to reinvent this particular piece of equipment. We'll get there, I promise. So as Dr. Stockman said, this is the original, it's called the high pressure hydrant system. Then it's named well to the auxiliary water supply system. Then when we transitioned the system from the fire department to our PUC, it became the emergency firefighting water system. So they could grant delineate between domestic water supply and firefighting. It was built in the high value districts primarily. As it expanded, it came to the west side of town on the west side of Twin Peaks. It is a gravity fed system supplied from 2 tanks and a reservoir. So Jones Street tank and Ashbury tank, as well as Twin Peaks reservoir. I think I have all the numbers for water in a second, but they're effectively just water sitting on a hill. And then when you need it, it flows and gravity does all the work for us. Choo-choo. And we can put out a tremendous amount of fire. With the addition of pump station 1 and pump station 2 that go back to the dawn of the system, pump station 1 sits underneath our fire headquarters. Pump station 2 is out in Water Park. They can pump salt water into the system to replenish it. The pumps fill the reservoirs with the tanks, and then it goes through the process of the gravity fed again. That's the basic of it. We have a number of static sources also. Their cisterns, as Dr. Stallman said, which amounts to about 11 million gallons of water sitting in the streets of San Francisco. The smallest is 10,000, and the largest of the civic center plaza is 240,000 gallons. They average about 75,000, 200, 300. There's a lot of. At 10,000 gallons, most of our pumpers can pump that dry in about 5 minutes. So if you're talking about extended operations, if you're talking about trying to find a configuration, cisterns are good. The cisterns cannot be the answer to the problem. The high pressure hydrant system itself, as I said, supplied by Twin Peaks, has 10.5 million gallons of water and is refillable from the domestic system, but as Dr. Stallworth said, our understanding will be that domestic water, fresh potable water will not be the ideal choice for us to like to buy in the city. So the PUC will be highly resistant to refilling the reservoir for us from Crystal Springs or some of their other water sources. Asbury tank holds 500,000 gallons, Mill Street at 750,000 gallons, is gravity reservoir. Throw the hydrant in there because everybody always likes to create hydrants. West Twin Peaks is delineated by the black top, Ashbury by the red, and Jones with blue, so that they learn blue Jones, blue James. These are all high pressure systems. And for fighting the fire, as I said, the most important part would be the capacity, would be that 10.5 million gallons, or 3/4 million gallons. The reason it is a high pressure system, right? West Twin Peaks can be 140 PSI, Ashbury tank can be 143 PSI. The Jones Street tank, so at base of city, with the introduction of Twin Peaks Reservoir, can be 330 PSI of pressure. Why would you need that? You need that, again, if you're going to take a Gleason valve, put it on a hydrant, you tow the strings directly from the hydrant, you turn every hydrant into 3 fire engines. That's the Kubrick system. It's a great force multiplier. We have all the other pieces that we need. The 2 pumps that I described are capable of pumping 10,000 pounds per minute, 300 PSI. They are, to Dr. Stockman's presentation, saltwater systems drawn from the ocean or the bay. It's very difficult and expensive to maintain. Just throwing it out. We are lucky enough because of our recent bond measures that both of ours are in operation, but it was a heavy lift and very expensive lift. We also have manifolds on our shoreline, which are for the use of a fireboat, and they can pump into the EFWS system. They're located all along the waterfront, and again, maintenance has been an issue with these, but the primary goal with the current manifold would be to rid off a portion of the city. So wherever conflagration has occurred, we can just kind of cut off through valves portions of the city and just use the most proximal manifold with the fireboat and supply water with the great system. This was the map that Dr. Stockman showed with the original system and with the cisterns in place. And then as it's expanded, what the PUC has chosen is to create a system called the PEFWS, literally called the POOFs. So the POOFs is a potable emergency firefighter water system. This is a co-benefit system, so it allowed them to extend capacity for domestic supply to the west side of the town. However, it makes it less than ideal for the purposes of well, it will function effectively as an emergency firefighting water system. But there will be a lot of consternation and no joy if we ever have to use it for this purpose. If it requires the introduction of non-potable water to the system, it will be a tremendous burden to clean. But it does extend the capacity to the west side of town. So we look forward to it being completed. To date, it's only scheduled to be completed in the park, and it will require another bond measure to get it into the Richmond district. So to overcome that, we've long had what we're calling the portable water supply system, PWSS, which we refer to as hose tenders. So there's the legacy hose tenders. This is an example of the apparatus that was being used as a hose tender, or is currently being used as a hose tender, and we're introducing our new hose tenders in a second. Essentially, this is just a manifold. Pumps generally are not operable with 6,000 feet of 5-inch hose, and then all of the necessary portable hydrants and Gleason valves and other fittings to lay out an above ground hydro system. So if there's a loss, like another one of the doctors, one of the maps where it showed every place in the city where the domestic system would go down to bridge that gap, we'd use what we're doing. You can see you pump from one end, you pump from the other end, you get that redundancy, you get pressure across the system and a fixed system. And then in general, we would like to use it absent another fire. So we would like to use Gleason valves to power a hose, to power monitors or other firefighting devices, and allow the engines to be somewhere else fighting fire. This is a system that's supposed to be set up again with the Gleason valves so that we can greatly extend our capacity. So what we've done is entered into a contract with Rosenbauer. They produced 3 of the modern version of our host centers. This was the first host center. And host center 1, it's actually host center 18. It's stationed out in the Sunset District. As a main pump that can pump 5,600 gallons per minute at 100 PSI. So it's basically half of a fire boat. It's a land shark. It can cruise around the streets and put out fire like a fire boat. It has 4 8-inch suction hoses, ginormous. A submersible hydraulic pump, which is one of the things we're most excited about, with 3,000 gallons per minute with 100-foot range. So this can go into any static water source in the city and pump 3,000 gallons, which is a tremendous increase over class. The suction hoses that Dr. Scoffman showed, it's 2 8-foot sections. So you're not going to get too many lakes, ponds, swimming pools, reservoirs in the city with this will. Yeah, land fire. The monitor is designed to flow 8,000 gallons per minute, and here it is in a test at 20 feet reservoirs. They want that full 7.5 million gallons. They can basically shoot across. We only have 3 of them. The goal of hose centers for it not to be next to the fire, but it would provide a great firefighting capacity. What it does for us is if we take the map and these kind of fuchsia dots represent the expansion that one of our host centers can give us. That's like a 1-mile circle in the city of San Francisco. If I take that and I can drop those dots anywhere in the city, then I greatly expanded the reach of our EFWS or our high system. Again, 3 are on delivery. I do worry about capacity for purchasing more. We're having trouble maintaining regular fleet, but we will get to it. So. And the missing pieces, of course, are Gleason valve support and the border nozzle, the things that took one hydrant and made it breathe fire. The nozzle, again, is another antique piece of brass that went out of fashion about 16 years ago in the agency, but it was the only large diameter nozzle that we have and has not been replaced. That was the capacity to take the Girl Scout troop and tell them to sit on a hose and put out the big fire. I have a